What's up, meta nerds? This feels so funny to have covered just about every variant of the TIE fighter, but I want to finally come back and do a high quality video of the basic TIE LN. The last one I did was over 8 years ago, in the very few early months of this channel, when I used to scream into the mic, if people remember that, and I wasn't using any audio or video clips, so this one will have a whole lot more info packed into it. Hopefully you'll see it as the definitive TIE fighter breakdown. So let's get into it. This story surprisingly starts with Count Dooku. In a way, he was the first one to ever see a TIE fighter, and the first to see X-Wings, way back when he was just 18 years old, during the year 82 BBY, or 82 years before the Battle of Yavin. During a certain mission, he was captured by dark side cultists called the Presagers of Hakote. The galaxy far, far away is so large that they were able to sacrifice millions of people before the Jedi Order caught on, and their dark side rituals that try to convert pain and death into dark side energy to fuel their visions into the Force. When they captured the young Dooku, they sensed his great power and subjected him to lengthy torture sessions, and he would suffer many pain-induced visions. And in one of them, there were snippets of future space battles, the first glimpse of what we would come to know as the TIE and X-Wing. How ironic is it that he would not live to see either of those creations with his normal eyes, just these sort of spiritual eyes. When the Republic became the Empire in 19 BBY, they would still operate with most of the holdover assets from personnel to ships and weapons. Eta 2 Actis Interceptors and ARC-170s were the most common, and they would remain so for about 5 years after this change. It was Grand Moff Williff Tarkin, regional governor of the Outer Rim territories, that personally commissioned Sinar Fleet systems for this next generation fighter. But these would be qualitatively different in just about every way. I say this all the time, but we get this perfect example of how the ruling power's philosophy affects everything. Even when the clones, who were meant to be organic droids that just follow orders, even these products, end up being treated better during the Clone Wars because they were led by the Jedi, and within a government with more checks and balances. Even if sociopaths filled many of those offices on Coruscant's upper levels, none came close to the evil incarnate that was Darth Sidious. In his Empire, we see free-born citizens who willingly join the Empire being the ones treated like disposable pawns on a board game, treated worse than clones bred in a lab. Tarkin's main concern was that the TIE fighter be cheap to manufacture, and it would end up only costing 60,000 credits, less than half the cost of an X-Wing and 1/3 the cost of an ARC-170. This was part of an evil but genius move to spread their power over as much area as possible. And crucially, it ties an ever-increasing number of citizens to the military. This point is really incredible, so I hope I can do it justice here, but the whole point is that these fighters would be powerful enough to actually destroy civilian craft. You see countless times how to ground troops, or when you're just hiding out in civilian settings, the TIE is terrifying. It really does feel like calling in true air support with this overwhelming, uncounterable power. But if you zoomed out and compared it to vessels during the Clone Wars, it feels closer to something like a Vulture droid, not even close to an ARC-170. That's in part because it doesn't need to be, it's not fighting an actual military. But the crucial point is that the Empire actually wants to lose some in combat. Every TIE fighter that is destroyed is a great PR win for the Empire. It takes the rebels so much effort to finally get their hands on some anti-air device or ship capable of going toe-to-toe with a squadron. But even when these rare events happen, the Empire can look just weak enough to warrant a new wave of funding and definitely policy changes in your area, stripping you of even more rights, but also jadening even more people against the rebels, who seem to just cause chaos with no real hope of ever changing anything. And all of this snowballs. More and more people find themselves working in this Imperial war machine pipeline. From the most basic of just cleaning the floors at a TIE facility, to mining raw materials, to high-level engineering, perhaps investors, and then actual military service is for most the best career option they have. Like we saw most famously with Han Solo, who fell in love with the allure of TIEs zipping through space. These were very fast, sleek, unique, next-gen craft. And because they were so cheap, they were everywhere. To some, they would be just enough of a show of force to keep them in line, and to others, they may have actually glimpsed one, and be a sort of motivating carrot on a stick type thing, where they could join the military and hope to one day be TIE pilots. When some of those were destroyed, the Empire swoops in with hundreds more to replace them, and if you're in that militarized industrial complex, your food and paycheck rely on the Empire. And even just at a personal, sentimental level, you may know people that were killed by the rebels, and are constantly reminded that the rebels could come for you at any moment. In the process of blowing up some TIE facility, they're blowing up the janitor too. And this is all with the backdrop of the whole idea is that Palpatine's leadership brought stability to the galaxy after the Clone Wars, a conflict that was unlike anything seen for 1,000 years, which had set every corner of the galaxy ablaze. Most of your average citizens just thought,
"We shall have peace."
So when you understand that point, isn't it really cool that when many people think of the Empire, the TIE fighter might be the thing that pops into their mind, and this craft really is an embodiment of Imperial philosophy. Tarkin would continually check in on the progress of these fighters, but the actual designing was done by Wraith Sinar personally, who wanted this to be a mix of features, from the scimitar used by Darth Maul, which is obvious in the wings, but also the compact and fast V-Wing in Eta 2, and even some ancient Old Republic models. This is how we get the iconic look of a pod between two hexagonal solar energy collecting wings. Because when you actually look into these panels, they really are basically solar panels. Yes, it can also serve to radiate heat, but they are mainly described as being for collecting solar energy. We'll look at this more in a bit, but a funny little factoid is that the Eta 2 also had a twin-ion engine system. So in a way you can call it a TIE, since TIE is just an acronym for twin-ion engine. These engines were originally PS3 ion engines, though after 14 BBY they became PS4, producing 4100 G of thrust and getting them up to a speed in space measured in the term megalights of 100, with a top atmospheric speed of 1200 km per hour or 746 miles per hour, which made it faster than almost every Rebel ship except the A-Wing. But it was slower than many Clone Wars creations like the Eta 2. For almost all of the TIEs we ever see in the Imperial era, except for some of the earliest models, it's powered by this reactor located at the base of the ball cockpit, with the cap being at the very bottom, with hoses very similar to what we see with the X-Wing, being used to pump in Tabana gas. This gas which powered everything from blasters to ships and is what made Bespin so important, basically being a giant Tabana gas cloud. This gas would be energized, and this ionized gas would be fired out the engines. These ions propelled out the back provide an equal and opposite reaction propelling it forward. And there is some slight vectoring ability here just by varying the amount of ions shot out through either of those engines, but even within each of the thrusters, there's said to be even more ways for thrust vectoring, channeling ions in all sorts of directions, happening in two different thrusters, allows for the TIE to be pretty maneuverable. This energy is also converted and channeled through the power lines to operate the rest of the ship. But the pair of LS-1 laser cannons is drawing just directly from the fuel tank. These bolts, even though they are called laser cannons, are actually balls of plasma. Without being drawn into certain plot points about running out of fuel, everything I've described has been a part of the lore for decades. The fuel, the Tabana gas power, the solar panel aspect, the ships needing a regular supply of fuel, from the X-Wings being fueled up before the Battle of Yavin, to large fuel tankers in our favorite games, it's all always been there.
All of it. It's all true.
Like almost all ships in this galaxy, it has vertical takeoff and landing capabilities via the repulsor lifts, the tech that allows things to float, and it has no shields because that goes against the points I said above. It would be far too expensive, and you actually do want to lose some people. The lack of hyperdrive is also a cost-saving feature, as that's usually one of the most pricey parts of any ship. This has tactical implications in that the TIEs relied on capital ship transport across the galaxy, and all pilots knew that they were on their own if they missed the bus, if their ISD jumped to hyperspace and abandoned them. Its hull used quadanium steel armor that could stop fire from handheld blasters, but there were exposed areas like in the wing stabilizers where a lucky shot might bring them down. But of course it gets blasted to pieces by proper military-grade laser cannons, heavy blaster cannons, but also terrifyingly there are accounts of micrometeoroid impacts, so I'm sure that's not good for pilot confidence when fighting in space. Though the cockpit shape is said to compensate somewhat, pilots do report that its spherical shape has caused many shots to glance off instead of just striking straight on. And they do have a suite of sensor jamming systems, and could be upgraded with extra electronic countermeasures. Like mentioned, these wings are actually made up of 12 solar collectors, held in place by rigid quadanium steel foil braces and coated with a micro-crenulated surface designed to absorb energy efficiently. Power collecting by the wings was routed to the central solar collection hub and then fed into the twin-ion engines. That would seem to imply that originally they were really meant to just be solar-powered craft. And early models even used wing power for the laser cannons, but this drained energy too quickly. Those fighters were later refitted with a dedicated power generator for the weapons. And this setup became the standard on all TIE fighters. And that's the version we're seeing in this cross-section. There really are no images of this earliest model. The wings also acted as main stabilizers in flight and were strong enough to double as landing supports, which helped cut down on overall mass and did make it very easy to add TIE fighters to an outpost or ship hangar, even if they did not have some dedicated TIE support framework in place. But in dedicated spaces, they were meant to be launched and recovered using special cycling racks. These were standard on Star Destroyers and other Imperial facilities, with each rack able to hold up to 72 fighters. This system made it easier for pilots and technicians to access the craft, and included small tractor beam projectors to help guide fighters back in during landing. One enormous downside of the wing layout was that it blocked part of the pilot's view. Imperial leadership saw this as acceptable and even useful. Again, just disturbing how this Imperial philosophy is manifesting at every level. But the higher-ups said that this was a good thing, since it encouraged pilots to focus straight ahead on their targets. Almost as if they're talking to droids or animals. No looking around, no creative thinking, just blindly fighting forward. And in a way, some argued that there was extra protection for the cockpit, as side-on attacks would hit these enormous wings first. And to be fair, there were plenty of onboard sensors to help make up for any blind spots. And then there is the issue that the TIE LN was mainly built for space combat. It could fly in atmosphere, but it was at a clear disadvantage comparable to fighters like the X-Wing. The hexagonal wings made it harder to control and more vulnerable to crosswinds, and trying to slow down too aggressively by reversing thrust could put dangerous stress on the wing spars and support pylons. But of course, in the right conditions, the TIE could still perform well. And is even impressive in tight urban environments, and was faster than the X-Wing, even noting for having sustained dogfights at supersonic speed, especially in thinner atmospheres. Originally, the fighter's main weapons were a pair of LS-1 low-temperature laser cannons, and we have examples of this being powerful enough to destroy a Taylander shuttle with a single hit, but by the time of the Battle of Endor, these had been replaced by the LS-7.2 laser cannons. The green bolts fired by the TIE are colored that way because of the Empire's use of higher-grade blaster gas, and was also said to help pilots track their shots visually. This bright green stood out even better than a red bolt, especially when there's all sorts of explosions in the battlefield. Targeting was handled by a TS-8 targeting computer, which was later upgraded to a TS-9A, which was considered better than the systems used on Rebel fighters. Since all combat ships use some form of sensor jamming, the targeting computer helped cut down the time needed to lock onto a target, though pilots had to constantly adjust it for better results. And what's really cool is that, although it's incredibly rare, they could be modified to mount missiles or swap out their lasers for other weapon types like ion cannons. Inside the central cockpit pod, we see the flight controls, view screens, targeting systems, tracking equipment, and even a homing beacon in case the fighter was stolen. And there's just enough space for a pilot. Although it was designed for a single occupant, we have seen where more people fit inside, and that cockpit had to be sealed and pressurized. But it had only basic oxygen scrubbers meant mainly to protect onboard equipment. Because there was no real life support system, pilots had to wear sealed flight suits and vacuum-rated helmets. This is another thing that might be seen as a feature, not a bug. If some rebels somehow stole a fighter, they would also have to steal an entire TIE pilot suit. Without it, this thief could not get off-world. Underneath the pilot's seat, there was an armored data recorder, something like a black box, that was designed to survive the total destruction of the fighter so that experts can figure out what went wrong. Was it a system failure or a rebel attack? And there's also an ejector seat. It used an anti-gravity unit and automated safety system to guide the pilot clear of debris and reduce the risk of serious injuries like spinal damage by controlling when restraints were released and when the parachute deployed. And there was even a locator beam to help recovery teams find the pilot. Though it's kind of a known thing within the Empire, that if you did have to bail, you were basically on your own. In terms of how they were deployed, single fighters were used for scouting, pairs were assigned for escort duty, and 4 fighter sentry groups patrolled around Imperial ships or facilities. A standard attack squadron consisted of 12 TIE fighters, and 6 squadrons together formed a full attack wing of 72 fighters. And I wouldn't really call this a variant, but more than a month after the Battle of Jakku, all the TIE LN fighters used by the Quellan, Nebula, and Imperial Remnant were upgraded with advanced weapons developed by Ved Foslo, and this seems to energize a more powerful laser cannon, which now has shots that can punch straight through both shields and hull plating, destroying enemy fighters in a single hit. Again, more of a mod than an actual variant. And as for its dimensions, it had a length of 7.24 meters, or 24 feet, a width of 6.7 meters, or 22 feet, and a height of 8.82 meters, or 29 feet, meaning it was about 43% shorter than the ARC-170 and 40% thinner than the X-Wing, but it's about twice as tall as the X-Wing. And now we should end by finishing up its history. After the first prototype fighter was released, the Empire quickly approved the design and signed an exclusive production contract with Sinar, and the fighters first entered service in 18 BBY, just 1 year into the Imperial era, with Imperial mechanic Willard Whalen working on the TIE line from the very start. By the time of the invasion of Mon Cala later that same year, TIE fighters were already rolling off assembly lines and were being used as part of a deliberate show of Imperial power, highlighting the Empire's new military hardware. Once deployed, the TIE fighter became one of the most recognizable symbols of Imperial rule. Pilots were trained to put mission success above their own survival, and a conspiracy started spreading that these fighters were fragile by design. Pilots came to be seen as expendable assets, and with the Empire's massive population and industrial base, losses never seemed to matter to them. Swarm tactics and non-stop mass production made replacing destroyed fighters easy, and the low cost of each unit encouraged even wider use. Of all people, Tarkin was known to criticize the TIE fighter, which shows a really nasty side to his psychology. He was well aware that these were horrible work conditions. Specifically, he critiqued the cramped cockpit, and he didn't really even see them as actual fighters. They weren't proper things that you could be proud of, that a pilot could build a bond with and see as their ship. The pilots and the ships were both described as disposable. It's to my point earlier that how was that any different from a droid? But what he did love is their loud engine sounds, which, although of course engineering and speed were the most important, apparently there were efforts to purposely make them sound intimidating. Part of the core Tarkin doctrine philosophy, that fear is the Empire's greatest weapon. One of the most common Imperial commands was to order pilots to fly low over population centers, especially when there was any rumblings or discontent amongst the people. Acoustic therapy, sound therapy, to remove all those seditious thoughts. And over his career, the renowned mechanic Willard Whalen met many TIE pilots and was constantly impressed by their unwillingness to back down, believing that the fighter's rugged design actually hardened its pilots. As part of the Empire's 5-year industrial plan for the Outer Rim, TIEs were built on many worlds, including Lothal, and some were also handed over to loyal corporations to protect Imperial assets, which led to offshoot designs like the Mining Guild TIE fighter. Squadrons were of course used to suppress all sorts of uprisings, but one pilot that would get fame was former stormtrooper Ubric Adelard, who rose through the ranks to eventually become a Grand Moff himself. You can just imagine how great this story was for Imperial propaganda, and how you could get millions of new conscripts, people from bleak backgrounds, who could hold on to that hope that they could start as a stormtrooper and end up as a Grand Moff, ruling an entire quadrant of the galaxy with dozens of star systems. Stories like this, and the military pipeline in general, is one of the Empire's greatest assets. But nearly 2 decades into Imperial rule, rebel forces were getting more coordinated. On Lothal, Spectres fought against TIE fighters and other Imperial units before later joining the Phoenix Cell, and in 2 BBY, Mon Mothma unified multiple rebel groups into the Alliance to restore the Republic. While TIE fighters were more than capable to bully around unarmed civilian vessels, they faced a much tougher challenge once they began fighting dedicated rebel starfighters. Darth Vader and the sitting Minister of War would personally see Alliance forces attack a TIE facility, outgunning many of the fighters that were launched, and eventually destroying the entire factory. And after the destruction of the first Death Star, the Imperial military eliminated the old distinction between Army and Navy pilots, known informally as groundhogs and vac heads, and began a major reorganization. And this included addressing the TIE design itself and spawning many variants, like the TIE Interceptor, Bomber, the SK-X-1 experimental fighter, the Reaper attack lander, and perhaps the pinnacle, the TIE Defender. While Thrawn would push to just pump out more TIE Defenders, just make more units that could neutralize any military threat from the rebels, the Emperor focused more on what he thought was the bigger picture by trying to produce a second Death Star. Though by the time of the Battle of Endor, TIE Interceptors made up about 20% of the Empire's entire starfighter force, and the plan was to eventually have the Interceptor be the standard TIE. A kind of in-between of Thrawn's vision, not as many TIE Defenders as he would hope, but at least the basic unit would be more capable. But of course, after Endor everything changed, and the Imperial supply problems seriously slowed down production, and while the Empire tried to hold on, the entire production network was rapidly breaking down. Many Imperial-class Star Destroyers were left operating with too few fighters and poorly trained replacement pilots, and though exact production numbers were classified, most of the estimates suggest that Sinar built at least 4.6 million Imperial TIE fighters for use aboard Star Destroyers. And while exact production numbers were classified, most estimates suggest that Sinar built at least 4.6 million Imperial TIE fighters to be used aboard Star Destroyers, other naval vessels, and defense installations. What all agree on is that more TIE fighters were active at the same time across the galaxy than any other starfighter in galactic history. Of all the wars of every era, it is the TIE fighter that would see the most service time and combat. That's it for its breakdown. And as for behind the scenes facts, there are a ton of amazing concept art images from Colin Cantwell, who designed all sorts of things for A New Hope, and sound designer Ben Burt created that TIE fighter sound that we all love, combining an elephant call with a car driving on wet pavement. The TIEs that we saw in A New Hope were actually really white in color, and there's a ton of different ways the coloring could have gone. Some say that it was meant to have a maroon hull. This dark red wouldn't be subject to the effects of what's called blue spill. It was a problem with the grayer models like the Star Destroyers when you're filming against a blue screen. But the problem was that this dark red maroon color blended too quickly into the mostly black star field, and so that's how you get this much lighter gray. There's even accounts that the ball cockpit was supposed to be blue, but of course that doesn't work with blue screen either. But it's funny how this design idea came back in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, where they kind of have a more blue-gray hue. Of course, the combat itself was inspired by World War II dogfight footage. People at Industrial Light and Magic were referencing World War II air combat clips while working on A New Hope. And if you ever want to pick it up, the TIE Fighter will be in just about every one of these visual dictionaries or complete cross-sections books. But I would just go with the biggest Star Wars complete cross-sections. Thanks for watching, hope you liked it, but most important of all, remember, those who would give up liberty for peace deserve to be taken out by micrometeor impacts. And the Force will be with you, always.
I have arrived.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is going to pull from every resource available over the decades to completely understand the TIE Advanced X-1. In the early years of the Galactic Empire, Imperial engineers were trying to overcome the limitations of the standard TIE LN space superiority fighter, what we know as the common TIE fighter. This ambitious prototype starfighter was developed by Sinar Fleet Systems with direct input from Sith Lord Darth Vader. Vader was also the Empire's top pilot, and he approached Sinar's chief designer Wraith Sinar with specifications for a new craft that could serve as his personal vessel, one with greater range, survivability, and more firepower than ordinary TIEs. Sinar had already been experimenting with improved models. An earlier prototype known as the TIE Advanced V1 had tested this novel bent wing design and other enhancements. And while the V1 was promising, it did have shortcomings. Its small wing generators couldn't power all systems without extra fuel, and several units were lost in rebel engagements. All of this came together to prevent it from reaching mass production, but the lessons learned set the stage for Vader's new fighter. Around 4 years before the Battle of Yavin, Sinar delivered on Vader's request. Imperial Navy analysts immediately saw this craft as a potential next-generation TIE, and even Rebel intelligence was reporting that this would be the replacement for the standard TIE fighter, incorporating the latest technologies to address the TIE LN's weaknesses. It was the first of the TIE series equipped with both a hyperdrive and deflector shields, meaning it could travel across the galaxy independently and keep that pilot alive. As Rebel attacks are taking an increased toll, being able to survive engagements and escape, we see that the Empire is starting to turn away from this philosophy of TIE pilots as being disposable. And so combined with that long-range capability, the advanced X-1 was ideal for elite pilots on special missions, from hunting Rebel cell leaders to serving as the personal mount of high-ranking Imperial agents, doing things that the standard simple TIE could not. The most obvious visual difference is the curved bent solar array panels. These are evoking older Sinar designs like the Scimitar-class Star Courier and the double-hull TIE SA bomber. These panels are angled inward rather than flat, increasing the surface area available for solar energy collection while reducing the craft's profile. So this bent wing design gave it slightly more power for its systems and made it harder to hit side-on compared to the large, flat, hexagonal wings of a regular TIE. And the fighter's fuselage was also an original space frame, not just a modified TIE cockpit. It featured an elongated rear section housing additional equipment and a reinforced Durasteel alloy hull, which combined with that shield generator really went a long way for survivability. Vader even requested a custom cockpit layout to accommodate his armored suit. Showing how intimately he was working with the designers, his is truly a tailor-made prototype. Despite all the advancements, it still remains relatively compact, measuring 5.8 meters in length, 6.2 meters wide, and 3.8 meters tall, so 19 by 20 by 12.5 feet. This puts it in the same class as the standard TIE fighter, though the X-1's elongated rear and curved wings give it a bulkier appearance, and is being propelled by a pair of Sinar Fleet Systems PS 5.6 twin-ion engines, which were an upgraded model of the standard LN, providing more thrust. This meant that in space, the X-1's acceleration was an incredible 4,150 G, and it had a sublight speed rated at 105 megalight units, a slight edge over the TIE. While in atmosphere, this larger size with the slightly faster engines does make it break even with the TIE LN, as both are 1,200 kilometers per hour, about 745 miles per hour in atmosphere. Much of the extra power was diverted into the shields and other equipment, and so that's why its speed and maneuverability were only slightly improved over the stock TIE fighters. It was said to have a larger turn radius, but was more stable at high velocity and in complex maneuvers. A really useful trick, and one has to wonder if the Anakin Ghost in the Machine of Vader may have influenced Sinar in this design, but it's noted to be exceptionally well at sustaining rolling turns, in other words spinning, and was especially good at flying backwards, both of which are said to be things that the TIE fighter just cannot do. Its hyperdrive was a Class 4, and it had a small navicomputer limited to 10 pre-programmed jumps, and this gave Imperial commanders the option to deploy the fighter independent of carriers. A dramatic change from the strictly short-range role of earlier TIEs, meaning you didn't have to have an Imperial Star Destroyer appear in a system and then deploy the TIE fighters. This thing could just pop out of the blue void of hyperspace on its own. And really reflecting its prototype origins, the shield was also an experimental new design, a stabilizing field projected by a super magnet in the rear, which helped the ship balance the shield energy, and pairs of projector bars around the craft emitted the deflector fields. In ways, it is very similar to most other ships, but this slightly different design, while expected to give some edge, was a real headache for technicians, and even Vader himself was known to have to do last-minute tuning of the shield emitters before several missions. But that cuts both ways. The fact that Vader didn't lose his cool and just destroy this with his force powers, or slice through it with his saber, meant that it was worth maintaining. Even if far more annoying and labor-intensive, the X-1's shields really were a bit better, a true next-generation tech. And then of course there's the armament. It keeps the twin laser cannons of the predecessor, but upgrades them to heavy LS 9.3 laser cannons on fixed forward mounts. These cannons packed a stronger punch than the light guns on the TIE LN, and so you get a great synergy that it can pop out of hyperspace on its own, use its better evasive powers, its shield and better armor, to stay alive and deliver heavy laser cannon impacts, survive the battle and escape through hyperspace. Really turning the hit-and-run tactics against the rebels for once. And the biggest show here is the warhead launcher, usually a cluster missile launcher mounted under the forward hull. It could carry up to 20 cluster missiles in its magazine, and so the destructive output here is incredible. From heavy laser cannons to 20 cluster missiles, it could take out capital ships, all the way down to strafing tightly grouped enemy fighters on ground. And every pull of the trigger was incredibly accurate with the Glucon CRX-9 advanced targeting computer. This target acquisition system was reportedly more sophisticated than that of ordinary fighters and was calibrated to counteract the heavy jamming used by Rebel craft. Though again here, we're seeing that prototype issue creep up, that there were reports that pilots had to frequently adjust the targeting settings in combat in order to get the most use out of it. But again, the people complaining about it are saying that it's worth it. All the pilots that flew it seemed to love it. It was also just more comfortable. The cockpit was pressurized and had life support systems for extended missions, and carried consumables for up to 5 days of operation. Though when they did expect to see combat, they usually still wore the sealed flight suit and helmet as a precaution, just in case they did take on damage, and they had that ejector seat for emergency escapes. While a lowly TIE LN pilot might be left to die in the void of space, the advanced X-1 pilots were a higher quality, more useful to the Empire, and so there was a better chance that there might be someone coming to rescue them. Though of course, all this tech comes with a cost. They come in at 160,000 credits, nearly 3 times the cost of a basic TIE, and also the maintenance is more frequent and more expensive. But sadly, as incredible as it is, that cost really does seem to have held it back. The Tarkin doctrine was still going strong, and because a city could be terrorized by a single TIE, having more TIEs spread out across the entire Empire, making sure the citizens saw one frequently and were scared into obedience, that was still seen as more valuable than the advanced X-1 and all of its mission-specific benefits. Overall, the Empire still wanted to just pump out as many cheap TIEs as possible. But at least a sort of middle ground was reached. They saw that there was some value in making some next-gen, limited runs of new prototype TIEs. The V1 had sort of previously proven this, but their lack of shielding really held them back. The X-1 was essentially an improved, full-scale realization of the V1's ideas, having larger wings with a higher capacity, stronger reactor, and room to incorporate shields and a navicomputer, being a true next-gen upgrade to the TIE LN, not just the sort of different wings of the V1. The X-1 would most directly lead to the creation of the TIE IN, or TIE Interceptor, which did become the Empire's go-to elite fighter in the years after the X-1. The Interceptor was, in many ways, a more stripped-down descendant of the X-1. They removed the expensive hyperdrive and shield systems, but did retain aerodynamic improvements and added firepower, going up to 4 laser cannons, with 1 on each of the wingtips, and those wings also being angled. The Interceptors did prove to be extremely fast and lethal, but they still relied on overwhelming numbers and were still tied to the larger support system. They had to be deployed locally via a Star Destroyer. Perhaps the true descendants of the TIE Advanced, produced by various Imperial think tanks, are the TIE Avenger and TIE Defender. The Avenger is a shielded, hyperdrive-equipped fighter that improves on the X-1's speed and maneuverability, made it leaner and stronger, adding solar strakes on the wing panels for better power distribution, and refining of the frame for agility. But the Avenger was even more rare, showing that the Imperial will was just not there to produce this kind of next-gen TIE. The TIE Defender was an even more radical leap. Spearheaded by Grand Admiral Thrawn, it was a multi-role super fighter with 3 angular wings, equipped with heavy cannons, missile launchers, deflector shields, and a hyperdrive. So finally we get something that far surpasses the X-1. It was better in every way, faster, stronger, and more powerful, but of course, there's the cost. It's by far the most expensive, and so it was also incredibly rare. Now I should note that the TIE SA bomber was actually not influenced by the X-1. These were produced at about the same time, so not related to each other, but descending from this same Imperial initiative. So that's it for the breakdown, but as for its history, its most famous pilot was of course Darth Vader himself, who took full advantage of all of its capabilities on multiple occasions, first unveiling it in live combat about 4 BBY during an Imperial campaign against a Rebel fleet. He single-handedly engaged the Rebel flagship Phoenix Home, obliterating the cruiser and scattering the rebellious forces. This dramatic demonstration of the fighter's prowess and Vader's skill confirmed to Imperial leaders that the new design was something special. And Vader continued to use the X-1 as his personal starfighter in the following years. He piloted it to the Sith temple world of Malachor to confront former Jedi Ahsoka Tano, and traveling to this far-off world would be impossible with most other TIEs, and it earned its legendary status during the Battle of Yavin, the climactic battle in which the Rebel Alliance struck the first Death Star. Vader launched in his custom X-1 to reinforce the Death Star's TIE squadrons, using his superior speed and targeting to pick off Rebel starfighters one by one. The shields proved their worth, and Vader shot down several Rebel ships, including X-Wings, and none of the Alliance pilots could land a lethal shot on this nimble and hardy craft. The Dark Lord nearly turned the tide of battle, only in that last minute when the Millennium Falcon swooped in and fired on Vader's group, causing one of Vader's TIE wingmen to panic, and Vader's X-1 was accidentally struck by his wingman's fighter, damaging its solar panels and sending Vader spinning off into space. This would have the unintended effect of making sure Vader survived the destruction of the Death Star, and though the ship was crippled, its sturdy construction and Vader's expert piloting kept it from crashing into anything else, and it drifted away from Yavin along with debris from the battle. Imperial recovery teams later revived Vader and recovered the wrecked X-1, being picked up by an Imperial Gazanti-class cruiser, with officers Sienna Ree and Barisa Sai managed to locate and rescue Vader amidst all the wreckage. The Dark Lord's survival and the salvage of his unique fighter became an Imperial propaganda point. Of course, within Imperial circles, this major Imperial defeat was not advertised to much of the population, but being the sole survivor of this battle seemed to show the craft's reliability. Many in the Imperial Navy used this to push for full-scale deployment of the X-1, and Starfleet Systems was excited to present this all to the top brass, but ultimately it just came down to the cost. Even with this propaganda push, the Empire actually cancelled some large orders for the advanced X-1, and the logic was actually pretty surprising. Admiralty figures worried that a starfighter with a hyperdrive and packed full of 20 missiles might make capital ships seem less necessary, which threatened their own budgets and clout, as there's all kind of positioning to get a bigger and bigger capital ship. What class of ship do you command was the first thing that came to mind when judging one of their peers. But also there was the fear that giving every pilot the independent jump capability could lead to more defections in the wake of the Death Star's destruction. It wasn't a bug, but a feature that most Imperial ships had to rely on the capital ship. Instead of having thousands of TIE advanced pilots adding all that firepower to the rebellion, it was better to ensure that the admirals were loyal. Of course, there's the risk that they could defect with an entire Star Destroyer, but the Emperor felt more secure in a smaller number of dedicated loyalists than thousands upon thousands of now more deadly pilots. And so there's only a limited production run of the TIE Advanced, and just a few handful of squadrons were ever equipped with the X-1. One elite unit, the Storm Squadron, was known to fly them extensively, with its famed pilot rumored to be Merrick Steele. There was also Commander Juno Eclipse of Darth Vader's secret forces, but they were very rare exceptions, and so even for elite Imperial TIE pilots, the X-1 remained an exotic, almost sort of mythical craft, the true stuff of hangar legends, where pilots could brag about having actually flown one once, or just seeing one in person. You were most likely to see one if you served on the Star Destroyer Devastator, and later the Executor, Darth Vader's personal capital ships, where there were several X-1s in their hangars. Though Imperial Commander Strom deployed a flight of X-1s from his light cruiser to attack the space station The Wheel, the Empire would blame that attack on the rebels in order to justify seizing control of the station, and two of them fought alongside an assault transport to intercept a life pod near Constancia, believed to contain rebel fugitives, and some even saw them during the Empire Day Parade on Barleth in the year 2 ABY, where two of them were put on display atop hover pads as part of a procession of new military hardware. Holo broadcast beamed images of these sleek fighters to citizens across the core worlds, evoking pride in some and fear in most. Though rebel sympathizers turned this event into a humiliation, ambushing and destroying the parade formation, avoiding civilian casualties, while hijacking this broadcast and turning it into their own propaganda effort. And there were groups within the rebels that were always trying to capture or steal them. Not long after Yavin, an Alliance cell on Tatooine managed to acquire a few X-1s, and these were fielded by the rebel-aligned gang led by Sapanza. Although maintenance was difficult and replacement parts scarce, the rebel pilots who flew these X-1s still ended up agreeing with the Imperial pilots, agreeing that it was all worth it and was a great upgrade over the Y-Wings. Darth Vader would continue to fly his during the rest of the Galactic Civil War, using it during the Battle of Hoth and 3 ABY, providing fighter cover for the ground assault forces, and during the Battle of Endor and 4 ABY, it was docked aboard his Star Destroyer the Executor in his personal hangar, and so it was likely destroyed when this ship crashed into the second Death Star. Now what's interesting is that there was at least one eyewitness account from Endor that claims to have seen an advanced X-1 engaging rebel fighters during the Battle of Endor in the skies over its forest moon, and this is pretty believable, and was likely flown by either the Emperor's royal guards or some elite ace under Vader's command. After the Empire's collapse, these fighters found a new life in the galaxy, in the hands of many Imperial remnant fleets, being prized by warlords, and though the New Republic decommissioned most of the Imperial craft they came across, a few X-1s slipped through the cracks. Lando Calrissian acquired one, modifying it and using it as a flashy attraction to his asteroid mining operation on Dubrillion. He had it specialized so that pilots would race and dogfight remote drones for sport, and likely betting. But these would actually see combat during the opening battles of the Yuzon Vong invasion in 25 ABY, when Lando's asteroid base came under attack. In the Battle of Dubrillion, Lando pressed the old TIE Advanced X-1s into service alongside New Republic fighters. Jason, Jaina, and Anakin Solo, the three grandchildren of Darth Vader, each took controls of those advanced X-1 fighters, defending Dubrillion from the alien invasions and the ship that was in many parts created by their grandfather. And they managed to hold their own against the Yuzon Vong's Coral Skipper fighters, showing that even after 5 decades, this fighter was still lethal and space-worthy, at least in the hands of a descendant of a Skywalker and Solo. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, most of these details come from the Essential Guide to Warfare, the Complete Cross-Sections book, and game guides like Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. But most important of all, remember, no matter how good a ship you design, if the Force or the Tarkin plan are against you, you won't be changing history. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the TIE Interceptor will pull from every resource available over the past 40 plus years. Like all TIEs, it was manufactured by Sinar Fleet Systems. But unlike the standard TIE LN, which was seen as disposable, along with its pilots, the TIE Interceptor was both more advanced and the pilots would have to be too. You know, I never worded it like this, but it just hit me how poetic it is that the Republic, even though they worked with clones, the fact that they were led by Jedi meant that the clones were treated like real people. They were deserving of respect and protection. No corners were cut when it came to their equipment, like what we see with the CIS and their droid forces. But the Empire, led by a Sith, comes to see its actual citizens conscripted into the military as less valuable than the Republic and Jedi saw their purpose-made clone products of Kamino. The lowest level clone pilot had more support from a training level to the actual technology of their ship than the basic tax-paying TIE pilot. The entire TIE program, from the ships to the training, was all supposed to be as cheap as possible, spreading an Imperial presence as far as possible. And so pilots knew that their ISD was not circling back to see if anybody survived the dogfight. They would be focused solely on eliminating the rebels. But eventually the Empire had to address the growing rebel threat. And the Interceptor was actually developed out of the same program as the TIE Advanced X-1, which became iconic as Vader's ship. But that variant was too costly to mass produce. But they did still need something better than the LN to keep up with the growing rebel fleets. And the TIE Advanced V1 comes even closer to that goal, but still too expensive. Both of these options were great offerings, but too expensive and above and beyond what was needed. The Interceptor fit a perfect in-between. Not as advanced as these, but not as basic as the LN. And this is seen in every detail of this thing, starting with the price tag of 120,000 credits. Twice the basic model, 40k less than the X1, and 30k less than the V1. It would not have shielding or hyperdrive. There's some variants, but I'll get to that in a sec. And it would have less armor than the more advanced units. But it does up the damage output of the laser cannons from just a pair of 9.1 to 4 wingtip mounted LS 9.3 laser cannons, and does keep the same hardpoints on the cockpit ball. When you see those as laser cannons, those are also 9.3s. While it's also slightly faster in atmosphere at 1250 km per hour or 777 miles per hour, it was just barely faster than the LN, but far slower than the 1600 km per hour of the V1. And it has a 110 megalight rating, which is used to see how fast they are in space. All of this was done by increasing the size of the twin ion engines. And despite the cutout section of these folded, pointed wings, they still have more surface area for solar collection, as despite all the debate, these are definitely solar panels in almost every source ever, even if they also can function as radiators to disperse heat. But you can even see the energy accumulator conduits here, and what are described as ultra-high efficiency Garandium Coleum solar cells. And these are the same solar ionization reactors used in the TIE Avenger. In this cutout space in the wing here is where we can see the advanced targeting sensors. Under the cockpit is fuel storage like we see in the TIE Fighter cross-section, which also gives us a great look at the power lines and fuel lines. The cockpit window is transparasteel, the common window across all sorts of ships, and we can see it's surprisingly roomy in there. Though you are surrounded by sensor collecting devices and advanced comms like the AE-35's subspace transceiver, which was said to be unimpeded by the densest asteroids and terrain. And at the center, the pilot is met by displays on their surroundings like radar systems, a ship identifier that tries to predict the hull integrity of the enemy vessel, while also displaying your own craft on the right there, along with other customizable armament displays and devices being described here. Its dimensions are surprising. At a length of 7.7 meters or 25.25 feet, it was more than twice the length of the V1 and nearly a Wookiee longer than the advanced X1. But almost all the TIEs have the same width, and same for the height for all but the advanced. But what makes this craft so special is the lot of tiny engineering moves that aren't obvious on paper, like being only 50 kilometers per hour faster. Doesn't seem that impressive, but it's described as giving the pilot the ability to overclock the engines and engage an auto thruster, which allowed for quick boosts, and other design features allowed for even tighter rolls, giving it moves that the TIE LN could only ever dream of. And with the cannons, it isn't just double the firepower, but there's a precise calculation here. You combine it with them being slightly more powerful 9.3s versus the 9.1, while being 4x'd, it gets you to a power output that could quickly overwhelm shield generators, specifically for their main opponent, the X-Wing, while the maneuverability is still tight enough to dogfight with an A-Wing, even if it is a bit slower. You can really see it as not just trying to bridge the gap between the TIE LN and TIE Advanced, but also neutralize the big, powerful shields of the X-Wing, and keep up with the speedy and also shielded A-Wing. The slight bending of the wings may not seem like that big of a deal with the smaller profile, but it was Rebel pilot accounts that say that taken all together, the speed, maneuverability, and profile change all made it extremely hard to actually get hits on this thing. It's more than the sum of its stats. But to complicate it even further, there were variants that were able to pack in a hyperdrive and give it advanced shielding, while working multi-purpose warhead launchers onto those hardpoints on the ball cockpit. So at that point, it really is a completely different craft. But it would really depend on the cost of this variant, because now we're getting into TIE Defender capability. It might also be TIE Defender prices at $300K or 5 times the TIE LN. And all of those variants are possible because it had the same reactor as the Avenger, and so could power those specialized shields, but also prototype weapons like beam jammers, which could render a ship impotent, or project so-called decoy beams, which seem like they create false radar blips on enemy sensors. You could see how that would just be useful in a standard dogfight, but also in the dynamics of this civil war, where you might be trying to take pilots alive and torture information out of them, or even get some larger transport to give up and allow themselves to be boarded, because these false radar blips make it seem like they're surrounded by hundreds of TIE fighters. It might buy them time before an ISD could arrive and actually release dozens and dozens of TIEs. A believable bluff maneuver that could actually be quickly backed up when some larger ship pops out of hyperspace. Now, all of that sounds really impressive, but from the side of the Imperial pilots, they show us just how bad the arms race was during the war. As the Imps improved, the Rebels were also gaining more ships, their pilots were becoming better, having more experience, while also getting better pilots to join them. And so you get to the point that even these next-gen ships were getting shot down so much that those Interceptor pilots who survived just a handful of missions were considered top guns. But now that you thoroughly understand the ship, let's get into its history proper. Like I said, it's trying to address these two converging realities: the spiraling cost of advanced prototypes like the Advanced X1, and the increasing performance threat posed by faster, more heavily armed and defended Rebel starfighters. The Sinar Fleet systems first explored bent-wing, high-agility designs as early as 14 BBY, drawing directly from earlier prototypes like the TIE Advanced V1, with heavy testing done on Lothal and Alpha via the Inquisitorius. To achieve superior speeds and maneuverability at a viable mass production cost, Sinar stripped out the expensive hyperdrive systems and heavy armor, rerouted weapon hardpoints, and installed more powerful laser cannons. And it was all driven by a design philosophy produced from a prototype of the TIE Interceptor, which was used by agents like the Second Sister, seen during Jedi hunting operations on worlds like Bracca and Kashyyyk. By 3 BBY, the Empire began officially fielding the new Interceptor model, though slightly slower than the Rebels' RZ-1 A-Wing. The TIE IN offered a balance of speed, acceleration, agility, and firepower, and these were first distributed to elite formations, like the 128th Fighter Corps, the 181st Imperial Fighter Wing, and other select squadron commanders. It's during this period that we see things like the Teralov Massacre and the Battle of Turkana, having the first direct engagements between Rebel X-Wings and Imperial Interceptors. A decisive turning point came in 1 BBY during the Feihu campaign, when the Empire lost 286 TIE LNs to a Rebel outfit called the Lightspeed Panthers. Combined with the demonstrated superiority of Incom's T-65 X-Wing, this embarrassment accelerated the Empire's commitment to the TIE Interceptor as its dedicated anti-X-Wing platform. By the time of Operation Strike Fear and Operation Skyhook, the Interceptor had become a reliable frontline fighter, and you even see it during the suppression of Geyser Delso's droid rebellion. Following the destruction of the first Death Star at Yavin, Imperial High Command and Palpatine personally recognized the need for a vastly improved starfighter corps. A confession that probably had the blue guy punching air. Mass production of the Interceptor skyrocketed, with the Emperor planning to replace nearly all standard TIE LNs with Interceptors. And within months, upgraded models equipped with shields and hyperdrives appeared in select units, like seen under Colonel Bircher, who repeatedly ambushed Rebel reconnaissance groups, and they were seen in intense dogfights with Rebel leaders like Leia Organa, Wedge Antilles, Tess Alder, and Luke Skywalker. You can imagine how devastating these specialized, souped-up interceptors would be when you're a Rebel who thinks you're getting in a fight with something that doesn't have shields, that doesn't have missiles, only to find out mid-maneuver that you're dealing with essentially a totally different ship. This lulling the enemy into a false sense of security must have been invaluable, and led to the loss of countless pilots throughout the war. During the next 6 months, the TIE Interceptor's reputation grew rapidly, with Imperial pilots believing it was one of the finest dogfighters ever constructed, and we see it expanded into Imperial units like Alpha Squadron and Avenger Squadron. Warlord Zinj, in his hatred of Wedge Antilles, retrofitted 12 Interceptors with droid brains and high explosive charges, disguising them as the 181st under Baron Suntil Fel. The ruse initially fooled Antilles, but Wraith Squadron identified and disrupted the drone's control signals, turning them into easy targets. And during Grand Admiral Thrawn's campaign, shortages of pilots and ships led him to outfit many interceptors with shields in order to preserve the Imperial personnel, which again was part of his idea all along, that even with their vast resources, they shouldn't be so willing to lose ships and personnel. Instead, have elite pilots in elite craft. And this pragmatic shift continued after his death, as the Empire's industrial base crumbled, making a few shielded interceptors more valuable for survival than expandable TIE swarms. By the Battle of Endor, TIE interceptors accounted for 1/5 of the entire Imperial starfighter complement, and they would continue trying to hold on during the Galactic Remnant. We see them at the Battle of Jakku, and in the remnants of the Imperial Shadow Council, including Moff Gideon's personal forces, which still fielded large wings of TIE interceptors. They would participate in the assaults on the attack of Kryze's castle, in the fight over Kalevala, and in the retaking of Mandalore, where many interceptors were destroyed alongside Gideon's hidden base. But over time, the TIE Interceptor became increasingly rare. By roughly 11 ABY, veterans like Han Solo regarded them as outdated and a very unusual thing to see out in space. But Synar's design philosophy informed later models like the Predator-class fighter, and the First Order would introduce successors like the TIE BA, or the Baron Interceptor, and the TIE WI series under Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, which can all be seen as the modern descendants of the Empire's greatest dogfighter, with a bit of the wisdom of Thrawn thrown in that these all end up having the features of the more advanced variants of the TIE Interceptor. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, if you know this Star Wars ship lore, it's not the most consistent thing in the fandom. Almost all later sources have it that it's firing on the 4 wingtip cannons, that's what makes it different from the regular TIE, but their very first appearance in Return of the Jedi shows them firing their chin-mounted 5th and 6th cannons. And so that's why you have to have these details that those are hard points and you could slap weapons onto them, and that there are so many variants of the TIE Interceptor. And then the main model used in the Return of the Jedi collection in the section of the Blu-ray Special Edition, that only has 2 laser cannons total. Not 4, not 6, it's just the 2 on the top wingtips. And this is just thought to be due to the fragility of the model kit parts used to create those cannons, because photos taken around the time of Return of the Jedi show miniatures with 4 wingtip cannons. And across sources over all these different decades, there's always a little bit of fuzziness on when these actually get introduced, because the real-world, out-of-universe example is that they just needed some cool-looking new TIE fighter to be the Empire's equivalent of the new A-Wing Interceptor. That's it. If you've made it this far, please hit that like button. It really does help me out. I can really use your help. But most important of all, remember, Militaries rot from the top down, and the Force will be with you. Always.
Imperial interlopers destroyed all that we knew and loved in the night of 1,000 tears.
What's up, meta nerds? In this video, we'll be using every source available to fully understand the infamous primary bomber of the Empire. The TIE SA, for Surface Assault, was one of the principal triad of TIE craft serving the Galactic Empire, two cousins being the TIE Fighter and TIE Interceptor. Designed from its inception as a dedicated bomber variant, the TIE Bomber featured an internal ordnance bay capable of carrying a vast range of munitions for surface and space targets, details which we'll get to in a bit. Navy, Army, and Stormtrooper forces could all call upon the TIE Bomber to provide devastating fire support to any target in any environment. Designed and manufactured by the legendary Sinar Fleet Systems in order to replace the lighter TIE GT. As you'd expect, it's built around the eponymous twin-ion engines. This propulsion system, the PS4 twin-ion engines, was known for its simplicity and reliability, with no moving parts, which made it very low maintenance while lightening the craft overall and improving maneuverability. Its reliability was further enhanced by sharing numerous components with others in its family, including the cockpit, wing brace, laser armament, and drive system. Unlike complex, high-technology craft like the Rebel X-Wing, TIEs were usually combat-ready at a moment's notice. There was also no hyperdrive or dedicated shields, two of the most complex and expensive components for any craft, but this lightened the logistical and monetary strain on this series. On the other hand, it made the TIE bombers dependent on a mothership to bring them in between systems. But that's not really an issue, as the Imperial flag reigned across the galaxy. The bombers did not even include landing gear, just another component meant to lighten the craft and extend its range. Instead, they would be typically docked in suspended gantries, with their pilots boarding through a dorsal hatch. And for maintenance and servicing, the bombers would be cycling through moving launch racks to a separate space where they would be refilled and rearmed, before being moved combat-ready back into the flight bay. And while they were structurally capable of sitting on their wings, this would strain the craft's frame. And Imperial pilots were conditioned to rely on specialized facilities, which also had the psychological effect of making sure they didn't feel independent. But all these cost and weight-saving measures did lead to many disadvantages. Without a hyperdrive, the TIE Bomber could not be used to conduct out-of-system strikes. Without shields, the bomber was punishing to fly, as one mistake could leave the craft crippled or destroyed by an enemy fighter. But of course, Sinar's design bore fruit in the area where it was intended, increasing maneuverability. The TIE Bomber boasted a stunningly impressive rating of 86 DPF, making it 45% more agile than its counterpart, the BTLB Y-Wing, and only 14% slower than the viciously nimble TIE Interceptor. Perhaps most impressively, the TIE SA was 15% more agile than the X-Wing, enabling it to theoretically outmaneuver the queen of Rebel fighter craft. And speed-wise, the TIE Bomber performed adeptly with a maximum speed of 80 megalights, identical to its Y-Wing counterpart, and not too far behind the 100 megalight speed of the TIE Fighter and X-Wing. Laden with ordnance, however, the TIE SA was a plodding snubcraft, managing only a 60 megalight speed fully loaded. So they're somewhat banking on a surprise attack, delivering all their ordnance, and then making a more speedy retreat as other Imperial forces flood in. Its atmospheric performance was slightly worse compared to in a vacuum, with a max atmospheric speed of 850 km per hour, slightly slower than the B-Wing and X-Wing, as the blunt, solar panel wings of the craft slowed it considerably in yawning maneuvers, though still decent ability to pitch and roll, as these angled solar wings, built to increase durability, ironically made the TIE Bomber slightly better suited to turning in atmosphere than its TIE Fighter stablemate. Now that speed and maneuverability are out of the way, let's get to the part you've all been waiting for, the firepower. The most notable feature of the TIE SA is its twin pod design, with the port pods solely reserved for ordnance. A series of 3 independently rotating weapon rings carry a wide variety of munitions, racked and loaded by an internal maneuvering arm as the pilot selected his choice of ordnance. The potential payload could include one or a tailored mixture of proton bombs, proton torpedoes, guided concussion missiles, simple thermal detonators, or orbital mines up to a weight of 15 metric tons. 2 of the internal weapon rings carried spherical ordnance such as the proton bombs and mines, fed into a bomb chute for vertical delivery, while the 3rd was dedicated to missile armament and fired directly forward. Bomber squads could perform a wide variety of space or ground tasks, from seeding space with orbital mines to precision bombing of ground targets to delivering devastating volleys of concussion missiles against enemy fighter formations. The bomber had a reputation for precise delivery of firepower, delivering a tailored payload where the immolation of an ISD's orbital bombardment might be a tad excessive. And for those first 19 years of the Empire, might get those pesky civilian and senatorial critics talking. But precision is still a relative term though, as a squadron of 12 or a wing of 72 could very well flatten an entire town, borough, or installation with carpet bombing. For more specialty missions, the TIE SA could also carry thousands of dispersible pamphlets to weaken enemy morale, flip a rebellious population back to supporting the Emperor, or supply canisters to resupply isolated Imperial forces. As with other TIE cousins, the bomber's ion engines made an eerie howl passing overhead. A sound of hope for Imperial troopers, and a terrifying banshee call for rebels. In the heavily jammed electronic battle scene in the galaxy far, far away, electronic warfare systems were crucial for the success of the TIE bomber, and it came well equipped with a dedicated EMP generator mounted between the twin pods and used to short out a target's defensive electronic systems. This, coupled with a SFS TS-7B targeting computer, ensured that launched missiles and bombs reached their target. For ground strike missions, the TIE SA's Nordoxicon bomb site ensured reasonable precision, whether from close runs or high altitude. For self-defense, the TIE SA also carried a pair of SFS LS-1 laser cannons mounted on the chin of the pilot pod, identical to those carried aboard the TIE fighters. And so even though it was a bit slower overall, those laser cannons could still be equally deadly against unlucky rebel flyers. But of course, relative to the fighter or interceptor, those were rarely used, as they were forward fixed, and so most of the time it was better to just try and escape, not turn around and engage the forces that were following you after your bombing. Most would just try and get back to their carrier as quick as possible. Later TIE variants intended for bombings like the TIE Aggressor would include a turret similar to the Y-Wing, to at least offer some protection to its aft quarter. The TIE line has an infamous reputation for fragility, but in the case of the TIE SA, a variety of design features led to an increased, although frankly still not too good, durability. The entire craft was bulkier and reinforced not only to handle a heavy bomb load, but also to absorb the backblast of their own detonating munitions. Like others in the line, the TIE bomber's hull was made with titanium alloy, reinforced with quadanium steel armor. Its hull was rated as 3 times more durable than that of the standard TIE, although it was somewhat weaker than the Y or X-Wings. Unlike most other TIE variants, the bombers actually included life support for its pilot, although they still wore the complete flight suit as a matter of course in case of damage or destruction. While these features increased survivability, the TIE SA pilot really could only expect to survive when ejecting in atmosphere. Its relative slowness compared to the rest of the TIE line, combined with its lack of shields, made it easy prey alone. The X-Wing pilots referring to the unfortunate craft as dupes. An Imperial doctrine called for TIE squadrons to be escorted by other fighters and interceptors. But of course the bomber squadrons were the ones most targeted, and they suffered significant casualties in the face of determined resistance. Its chief asset, its maneuverability, could only be used if the bombers broke off their straight-line attack runs, which in essence would mean that the TIEs failed their mission even if the crafts themselves survived. Due to this disincentivation and the strict discipline of Imperial pilots, the TIE SA rarely got to showcase the impressive agility that, in theory, was the craft's most survivable feature. The TIE SA hull would be used to spawn a number of sub-variants, the most directly related of which is the TIE boarding shuttle. This model replaced the munitions in the starboard pod, with seating for a dozen personnel for boarding operations. Other variants included the triple pod TIE Heavy Bomber and quadruple pod TIE Punisher. And during the grinding rebel reconquest of the galaxy, this bomber became increasingly outdated, moving from a serviceable if somewhat unprotected bomber to a nearly obsolete and vulnerable craft. Designs such as the Scimitar Assault Bomber, approved by Grand Admiral Thrawn, would remedy the situation, keeping the TIE line viable and lethal. And stay tuned as we expect to have all these variants get their own video in the future. And unlike some craft, the TIE bomber is virtually identical in legends and canon sources. In fleet engagements, TIE bombers served a crucial role as part of an Imperial commander's arsenal. Typical complement of Imperial Star Destroyers would include 72 TIEs, split across 6 squadrons, one squadron of which would be TIE SAs. In battle, TIE bombers could deliver firepower beyond the reach of ISD turbolasers, or supplement the ship's assault at close range with ion or proton torpedoes. The ISD was also vulnerable to attacks in its rear quarter, with most of its heavy guns positioned to fire forward or in broadsides. TIE bombers filled this gap, keeping pesky rebel frigates or other warships from getting into such a position. As mentioned before, they could also be used for precise ground strikes, especially where the ISDs did not have a direct line of sight, such as on the far side of moons, or in rebel bases tucked away in hard-to-reach canyons, or other similar features. Among the TIE Bomber's key moments in history, they hunted for the Millennium Falcon after the evacuation of Hoth, bombing the asteroid the freighter was hiding in an attempt to flush the wily smuggler out into the open, and fulfilled their more expected role in the famous off-screen battle, bombing the Rebel base on Yavin 4 after the destruction of the first Death Star, inflicting serious damage in a small retribution for the major humiliation the Rebels had caused. They also shredded the X-7 factory station, responsible for manufacturing the TIE defenders of the rogue Grand Admiral Zarin, and perhaps most infamously, were used to deadly effect on the Mandalorian homeworld, reducing the capital of the most proud fighters in the galaxy to ash and rubble, and of course used extensively throughout the Galactic Civil War and beyond. As for its size, it was a chunky but compact boy, coming in smaller than both the TIE Fighter and TIE Interceptor. If one of these landed on Earth, it'd be about as long as an adult Malaysian reticulating python, or two medium sedans, and about as wide as a bowling lane is long. And Shaq's Illuminati clone standby could stand on his shoulders and just about touch the top of that wing, or a bit taller than both the Vulture droid and Tri-Fighter. That's it for its breakdown, but as for some cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, the bomber was actually designed for A New Hope, but it didn't make its way onto screen until Empire Strikes Back, with the TIE Shuttle compatriot first appearing in the cross-section of the Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator. The TIE has been an ever-popular model for LEGO sets, with several coming out over the years. And if you want to try it yourself, be sure to check out Empire at War and its mods, such as Thrawn's Revenge, as you could command the TIE SA, TIE Heavy Bomber, Punisher, and Scimitar. Funny enough, the power plant listed for the TIE Bomber, which I specifically didn't mention until here, is the same IA-2B reactor which propels Imperial Star Destroyers. And so while it's possible Sinar used the same name for two different types of reactors, it's more likely that this is just a continuity error. So what do you think? Were you surprised at some of the features of the TIE Bomber? Or do you still think the Rebels were right in just calling them dupes? Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe if you want to see more and check out these videos. But most important of all, remember, when you hear that TIE Bomber howl, it's already too late to change your allegiance. So hopefully the Force will be with you, always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video will pull from every resource available to completely understand the TIE Hunter. During the height of the Galactic Civil War, Imperial engineers introduced the TIE HU, or Hunter, as a multi-role starfighter to be the answer to the growing Rebel threat. The Rebel Alliance's T-65B X-Wing had proven itself a formidable all-purpose fighter, outpacing the Empire's mass-produced TIE fighters, and proving that their swarm tactics weren't as reliable. In response, Sinar Fleet Systems, the Empire's primary TIE manufacturer, began developing the TIE HU as a countermeasure. This new TIE variant was conceived shortly before the Battle of Yavin, with development accelerating urgently after the loss of the Death Star. Some in leadership may have even been thinking of the old TIE Defender project, seeing that might really have been a better option than a single space station. Data from countless skirmishes with Rebel fighters was analyzed to guide the Hunter's design, and by decree of the Imperial Admiralty, the TIE Hunters were assigned exclusively to elite Storm Commandos, Special Forces TIE pilots handpicked for high-risk operations. Though we should note that prototype Hunters were even field-tested by ace pilots like Suntir Fel prior to their general deployment. In an early demonstration of their unconventional use, Storm Commando Crix Medine once hid his TIE Hunters underwater in a planetary reservoir, keeping them down there for nearly a week to avoid detection, and then launched them without issue. Most spacefaring vessels would also be waterproof, but this is a tactic that's almost never actually used. And being able to keep them down there for a week shows the robustness of the Hunter itself, but of course also the ingenuity of these Spec Ops Storm Commandos. But despite promising performance, production of the TIE Hunter lagged behind schedule and never reached the mass production levels of other TIE models. Each Hunter was complex and costly compared to the standard TIE, but this extra cost was just another factor leading to their limited numbers. They officially entered service around 3 ABY, right after the Battle of Hoth, by which time the Galactic Empire was desperately seeking technological edges to turn the tide of war. And so the Hunter emerged from a period of intense technological arms race between the Rebels and their allies, and this tension within Imperial leadership to just build a second Death Star, or invest in more expensive TIE fighter lines. At a glance, the TIE Hunter looks like a hybrid of Imperial and Rebel design philosophies. It retains the iconic ball-shaped cockpit and dual twin-ion engines of the TIE series, but its wing configuration is really different. In fact, the Hunter's solar array wings are arranged roughly as a mirror image to the TIE Interceptors. Where the Interceptor has the Dagger-like wings bend inward, the Hunter's wing panels invert that geometry. And uniquely, the TIE HU incorporates folding S-foils similar to those on an X-Wing. The Hunter's pair of wing panels stay folded or closed during normal flight, and spread open into attack position when in combat stance. This feature was adopted explicitly because the craft was designed to emulate and counter the X-Wing's capabilities, though it doesn't exactly show great imagination. And when the Hunter's S-foils are closed for cruising, its weapons are effectively safetied and cannot be fired, which was a known limitation requiring pilots to time their attack runs carefully. But we do see that the Hunter is one of the few Imperial fighters of this era equipped with both a deflector shield generator and a hyperdrive. Another way it's trying to keep up with the X-Wing, and it's able to join the ranks of the TIE Defender. These additions gave it endurance and independence compared to most Rebel fighters, and a stark departure from the unshielded, short-range TIE LN and even TIE Interceptor models. With its advanced ion engines and lightweight design, the Hunter was reputed to be the fastest TIE variant in the Imperial fleet during the war. Specifically, it said that pilots reported its acceleration and agility could outstrip the speedy TIE Interceptor, especially with the S-foils locked closed for pursuits. To me, that means it's faster than the Interceptor, but this is probably coming out before the TIE Defender stats were known, because once the Defender gets referenced, it is by far the fastest. It is a single-seat starfighter, not with that internal seating capacity of the TIE Avenger, and is more similar to other general-sized TIE models. And though the exact dimensions were never officially leaked, Imperial records remain classified on this point. Its proportions fall in the same class as its peers, which can be inferred from hangar bay footage and other schematics, and it seems to fall between the Interceptor and X-Wing in length and wingspan, so probably closest to the TIE Defender. Where the Interceptor measures about 7.7 meters or 25.3 feet long, the Defender was about 9.2 meters or 30 feet, and the X-Wing extends to around 12.5 meters or 41 feet, so it's funny it's about a Wookiee difference between each of these. The Interceptor was 6.5 meters or 21 feet wide, while the Defender was 10 meters or 32 feet, and the X-Wing has a wingspan of approximately 11 meters or 36 feet, so when you're thinking width, don't think TIE fighter, it's actually closer to the X-Wing. As for height, the Interceptor stands 5.3 meters or 17 feet, the Defender is the tallest by far at 8.7 meters or 28 feet, and the X-Wing is around 4 meters or 14 feet. Here it's going to be closest to the Interceptor. In terms of weight and support systems, the Hunter was a step up from the minimalist TIE fighters and carried consumables for up to 2 days, though of course those commandos found ways to stretch it up to a week, in order to support their longer missions. Its Class 1 hyperdrive would make it the fastest of all the TIE models, and was necessary so that it could self-deploy across star systems more stealthily than arriving with an entire carrier and fleet. And so it's trying to fill this gap between the TIE Interceptor and these way more advanced TIE Avengers and TIE Defenders. But what truly defines the TIE Hunter, why it gets that Hunter name, is its diverse armament loadout, which was unprecedented for Imperial fighters at that time. The Hunter mounts a combination of laser cannons, ion cannons, and projectile launchers, earning its multi-role designation, while its primary guns are twin medium laser cannons, supplemented by a pair of ion cannons, which are all forward fixed. This pairing allows a Hunter pilot to both dogfight with lethal lasers and disable enemy craft or shields with ion blasts. This capability, while also seen on the TIE Defender, is something that the X-Wing and no other TIE can do. And on the underside of the Hunter's cockpit, it houses a proton torpedo launcher carrying up to 12 torpedoes, a payload that is comparable to that of a dedicated bomber. While we saw the Defender had some capability in this area, the Hunter's torpedo magazine rivals the capacity of the Rebels' Y-Wing, which was far slower and less versatile on attack and defense. In essence, the TIE HU packs a hitting power of a starfighter and a strike bomber into one platform. And I always make sure to stress that ion weaponry was increasingly important to the Empire in this era of a growing Rebel alliance, where capturing intel is more important than just blowing them up with their ship. Ion weapons allow you to disable things and take their crew alive. It did have some limitations. Despite its formidable armory, having only 2 laser cannons meant that in straight firepower, it only had half the laser barrels of an X-Wing or TIE Interceptor, which could be a disadvantage in close dogfights where overwhelming laser volleys matter. The Hunter's torpedo launcher provided great punch, but torpedoes are finite, and once the 12 munitions were expended, there was often no way to be resupplied during their mission, with the whole point of these being that they're used for spec ops missions. And like mentioned before, when those S-foils are closed in high-speed flight mode, all weapons are offline. This means a Hunter pilot caught off guard at cruising speed would need a critical extra moment to deploy wings and power up weapons, a quirk that an agile opponent could exploit. And its advanced systems like shields, hyperdrive, and multiple weapon types made it mechanically complex and expensive. And while some estimates have a price of 100,000 credits, it's also mentioned that some cost 275,000 credits, and that makes more sense for the fully outfitted model I've been talking about, with the laser cannons, ion weapons, torpedoes, hyperdrive, and shield generator. 100,000 is simply too cheap for this, when a TIE fighter was only $60K and a TIE Interceptor $75K. That 275,000 credit price tag is just below the TIE Defender, which makes sense to me. And so this expense, coupled with longer manufacturing time, limited how many could be fielded and maintained by frontline units. And so while there's a healthy debate if this is better than the TIE Avenger, most agree that the TIE Defender was still superior, even if you think that's a bit unfair as it's effectively playing an assault gunship role among other fighters. Let me know what you think down in the comments. All three of these next-gen TIEs gave the Emperor the flexibility that was exactly what the Empire needed to surprise rebel forces who were accustomed to more one-dimensional TIE fighters, which could be blown to bits in a single shot. It's the versatility that made them especially suited for the Storm Commandos, who often overtook covert and independent missions without support from dedicated bomber wings or capital ships. In practice, Imperial commandos deployed TIE Hunters for elite strike missions and rapid response engagements, like securing assets or VIPs, where a variety of threats might be encountered. And there are a ton of examples where Storm Commando teams with Hunters infiltrated a rebel base, engaged enemy fighters in the air, and also destroy ground installations or starship hangars if the opportunity arose, all in just a few minutes before popping into hyperspace and disappearing. And so it excelled in roles requiring stealth and surprise. One documented use in Imperial records was Dark Blade Squadron, led by ace pilot Tam Blackstar, which included one Hunter alongside TIE Interceptors. In 3 ABY, Blackstar's unit sprung a surprise attack on a rebel outpost on Arda 1. In that engagement, Blackstar's Hunter proved its mettle by chasing a rebel RZ-1 A-Wing, following it through a twisting canyon nicknamed the Gauntlet, and nearly taking it down with a pair of torpedoes. This kind of high-speed pursuit and precision strike demonstrated how a Hunter could perform tasks ordinarily needing multiple ship types, like the Interceptor's speed and the Bomber's heavy ordnance. And we see Imperial tacticians praising it in the Imperial Handbook for being able to achieve space superiority and perform attack runs in a single platform. Later in the war, Alliance forces managed to capture several TIE Hunters, and in one bold operation before the Battle of Endor, Wedge Antilles led Rogue Squadron on a mission to infiltrate the Imperial shipyards at Fondor.
Incoming ships, identify yourselves. We're delivering a captured rebel transport. Requesting permission to dock.
Disguising themselves in stolen TIE Hunters, Rogue Squadron pilots slipped past Imperial defenses and executed a surprise attack on an unfinished Executor-class Superstar Destroyer. The rebel operatives launched torpedoes from the borrowed Hunters, contributing to the destruction of the massive warship in dry dock. This feat highlighted the Hunters' value. An elite rebel squad could use them to fly covertly into Imperial territory, using that IFF to appear as friendly blips on sensors, and still pack enough firepower to cripple a Super Star Destroyer, at least while it's being built. With the Empire's collapse after Endor, it meant that the TIE Hunter never saw the widespread deployment its creators intended. Only small pockets of Imperial remnant retained any Hunters, and their legacy largely merged with the Empire's other advanced TIE projects in obscurity. In the New Republic era, there's been no confirmed sighting of a TIE Hunter, though the TIE Defender, thanks to Grand Admiral Thrawn's initiative, filled the role of the ultimate Imperial fighter, leaving the Hunter as an intriguing what-if of Imperial R&D. Though it is interesting to see how Palpatine's intuition is so strong. At least in some ways. I guess you can never really win if the Force isn't on your side, but all of these advanced TIE variants, the Avenger, Defender, and Hunter, at times fell into the hands of rebel elements, either the outright Rebel Alliance or Imperials that defected, and they quickly showed an outsized effect when used against the Empire. Palpatine's concern was that spreading these all across the galaxy might end up strengthening his opponents, or if he could just make sure that the leadership on the Death Star stayed loyal, that's fewer individuals that you have to trust. Keeping a single Death Star secure seemed far more plausible than trying to make sure that your starfighters didn't fall into enemy hands. And it should be pointed out that this entire TIE fighter movement was spawned on by the glorious T-65B X-Wing, and how expertly it was used by rebel pilots. A perfectly poetic insult to Imperial doctrine, which saw their pilots as expendable, barely above a droid, and thought that they could solve this problem by just throwing credits at it, having an enormous military-industrial complex pumping out never-ending swarms of cheap TIEs. The rebel efforts forced them to change this doctrine. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, it first appeared in the 2003 video game Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike, and it was expanded on in the 2014 Age of Rebellion role-playing game sourcebook Stay on Target, and is one of the few TIE models that has not come back into the new canon. Please hit that like button. I really do need your help. But most important of all, remember, if the Force turns against you, then you'll never make the right decision, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the TIE Defender will pull from every resource available, and by the end you'll understand why there's almost a unanimous agreement that this is the best TIE model ever produced. So let's jump right into it with its stats. The hull measured about 9.2 meters long, or about 30 feet 2 inches, making it about a Wookiee longer than the TIE Interceptor, though the T-65B X-Wing was still longer at about 12.5 meters or 41 feet. Despite this compact frame, it is able to pack in a Class 2 hyperdrive and deflector shields, which only the TIE Avenger can also claim. What truly defined the TIE Defender was its speed and power. With a top atmospheric speed of 1,680 kilometers per hour, about 1,045 miles per hour, it made it the fastest combat craft of its era, and was significantly faster than even the TIE Interceptor, which tops out at 1,250 kilometers per hour, or 775 miles per hour, and blows away the X-Wing and all other advanced variants of the TIE. The twin-ion engines that it's using are the Sinar PSZ 9.7 models, and these advanced thrusters made it incredibly agile, faster than anything the Alliance had ever faced, and it flew more like an interceptor. And that agility was coupled with overwhelming firepower. It carried 6 wingtip-mounted laser cannons, 2 ion cannons, and a pair of warhead launchers that could fire concussion missiles or proton torpedoes. In effect, it could unleash the kind of damage normally requiring a whole squadron of TIEs. By contrast, the TIE Interceptor, designed purely for dogfighting, was armed with 4 laser cannons. There were some additional chin guns, but it carried no missiles, and none of the TIE variants, including the Avenger, would have those precious ion cannons, something that was increasingly necessary when you were fighting a rebellion. And capturing targets alive and extracting info was the most important outcome of a battle. The X-Wing came closest as a multi-role starfighter, balancing 4 wing-mounted lasers with a pair of proton torpedo launchers. It's a heavy armament for its size, but it's still a lighter loadout than the Defenders. And so the TIE Defender's comprehensive weapon suite meant it could perform both as a space superiority fighter and a strike craft, without necessarily needing to destroy your opponent, truly living up to its moniker as being a multi-role fighter. And its shield and armor made it the most durable of all TIE fighter models. In combat, a lone defender could engage and outlast multiple enemy fighters that would shred a normally unshielded TIE. And when Rebel fighters first encountered this new Imperial fighter, they were awestruck. Hera Syndulla, the veteran Rebel ace, warned that if the Empire produced defenders in great numbers,
our pilots won't stand a chance.
And neither will the Rebellion.
Despite these advantages, the TIE Defender also came with some trade-offs that shaped its tactical role. Its advanced systems, the hyperdrive, shield generators, extra guns, and custom engines made it expensive and complicated. Each unit reportedly cost around 300,000 Imperial credits, making that 5 times the cost of a standard TIE and roughly double the cost of an X-Wing. But somehow it's actually cheaper than the Avenger, which is part of why that ship was so rare. But at this price, fielding TIE Defenders was thus a significant investment, and the high cost and maintenance burden meant Defenders were deployed sparingly, typically reserved for elite pilots and critical missions. And strategically, the TIE Defender was envisioned as the game-changing space superiority fighter, something that could escort Imperial forces on extended missions, intercept Rebel attackers before they reached Imperial capital ships, and even perform bombing runs with its warhead payload. In Imperial doctrine, regular TIE fighters and interceptors were expendable swarms, relying on sheer numbers and speed. As the famous Imperial propaganda goes, TIE pilots rely on all guts, no shields. If you were a TIE pilot who survived long enough and impressed your superiors, you might end up sitting in a TIE Defender. And the logic of those like Thrawn was that one TIE Defender really did give you more than 5 TIE fighters. It blended the interception duties of a TIE Interceptor, the fast pursuit and dogfighting aspect, with the punch and independence of an X-Wing. And you might even see it referred to as a long-range fighter-bomber, thanks to its missile armament and the ability to cross the galaxy via hyperspace and deliver ordnance on their target. And so one of the clear strengths was the TIE Defender's self-sufficiency. With that onboard hyperdrive and week-long consumables, it could strike Rebel targets far beyond the reach of typical TIEs. Pilots could jump into battle without needing a carrier nearby, much like Rebel fighters did, and this also reduced the risk of leaks, as the odds that you might have a Rebel spy in your midst, or just some local citizen who is sympathetic to the rebellion, who then tells someone that this fleet is mobilizing, the TIE Defender is far more nimble. It's just a few fighters that are there one moment and the next they're into the blue void and carrying out their surprise strike on Rebel assets. In essence, the TIE Defender promised the Empire a starfighter that matched or surpassed the Rebellion's best on every front. It was as fast and maneuverable as the quickest A-Wing or TIE Interceptor, as tough and versatile as the reliable X-Wing, and as heavily armed as a dedicated bomber. The only weakness per se was that cost, and the bureaucracy that led to these things being so scarce. There are some significant differences here between Legends and canon, so let's start with the new canon version. 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, Thrawn initiated the TIE Defender program at the Imperial factories on Lothal, aiming to counter the growing rebel threat with a new generation of starfighters. The program had the full backing of Grand Moff Tarkin and Emperor Palpatine, showing that at least at first, the Empire had high hopes for Thrawn's project. The prototype defenders were designed by Imperial engineer Morgan Elsbeth, a name that would resurface decades later, and this prototype represented a leap forward in TIE design, and unlike some of his fellow Imperial leadership, Thrawn immediately recognized what a great design this was. Unlike the Death Star, which was secretly under development as Project Stardust, Thrawn's TIE Defender was a fighter-scale solution to the Rebels, theoretically cheaper and more targeted than a single enormous battle station. And there were Imperial strategists that began to debate diverting resources from Project Stardust to the TIE Defender program, especially as Director Krennic's Death Star suffered delays.
If construction of the Defender is to continue, you must make your case directly to the Emperor himself.
Thrawn argued that a fleet of elite fighters could be more decisive and flexible than any single superweapon. In the early development, Rebel spies managed to steal schematics and even sabotage test flights, which does prove that they recognized what a threat this was to the Alliance. When Phoenix Squadron, the rebels based on Lothal, encountered a TIE Defender prototype in combat for the first time, they barely escaped. Hera Syndulla's warning about the Defender's lethality spoke to the panic it induced. Here was an Imperial TIE that could outrun, outgun, and outlast the rebels' best fighters. Thrawn continued refining the design, even creating a specialized variant known as the TIE Defender Elite, which featured improved engines and shields beyond the baseline model. This top-tier prototype, flown by Baron Volt Scarus, was dramatically increased in speed and protected by enhanced deflectors. And remember, this is something that already beat everyone else in sheer stats. So this thing would simply overwhelm anything else it came across. Yet, even as the TIE Defender project reached its peak, it was about to be cut short. In a dramatic series of events on Lothal, Governor Price, who was Thrawn's ally, ordered the destruction of Lothal's fuel depot to thwart a rebel operation, an act that inadvertently crippled the factory's ability to produce defenders. This, combined with political shifts in the Imperial High Command, proved to be the TIE Defender program's undoing. Word of the Death Star's impending completion reached the Emperor, and the promise of that doomsday weapon eclipsed Thrawn's fighter initiative, as this was the true love child of the Emperor that was being worked on since even during the Clone Wars, and did more align with the Tarkin doctrine of leading through fear. Funding and resources were pulled back to Project Stardust, leaving the TIE Defender essentially cancelled by Zero ABY. By the time of the Battle of Yavin, only a handful of defenders existed, and they had not spread beyond Thrawn's region of operations. The Empire chose to pour its might into the Death Star, which we can't know how the TIE Defenders would have performed, but I think it's safe to say that Death Star 1 and 2 were enormous failures. And so though it plays no major role during the Galactic Civil War, the few prototypes and schematics that survived had long-lasting influence. Decades later, the First Order's engineers incorporated many of the Defender's innovations into their own next-generation TIEs, like the First Order's TIE SF and Kylo Ren's TIE VN, which featured deflector shields, hyperdrives, and heavy weaponry. And so in a way it lives on in spirit, and would forever haunt Hera Syndulla. Even decades after the war, she mused at what might have been, saying that if the Empire had deployed 100 TIE Defenders instead of building one Death Star, the Rebel Alliance story might have ended very differently. While in the original canon, the story of the TIE Defender plays out very differently. It is started in response to the Battle of Yavin, when the sudden Rebel victory forced the Empire to rethink its military strategy. Recognizing that standard TIE fighters were outclassed by Rebel X-Wings and Y-Wings, Imperial High Command initiated several advanced starfighter projects, chief among them the TIE Defender. Grand Admiral Demetrius Zarin, the Empire's head of starfighter R&D, was placed in charge of developing the TIE Defender in total secrecy. This top-secret program saw multiple prototype stages before the final design was achieved. The first step was a testbed fighter called the TIE Advanced X7, which was essentially a predecessor to the Defender. Early X7 prototypes retained the Defender's distinctive tri-wing configuration, but were stripped down technologically, initially lacking the hyperdrive, ion cannons, and missile launchers that would later define the TIE Defender. These prototypes were used to experiment with new high-output engines and targeting systems. And in 3 ABY, during the Imperial assault on Hoth, a squadron of TIE Advanced X7 prototypes were even field-tested in battle.
Imperials have got some new kind of ship design. Let's see what they're made of.
These prototypes proved underwhelming in that engagement. Renegade Squadron managed to destroy or even capture some of them, but the data gathered was invaluable. Undeterred, Zarin and Sinar Fleet Systems engineers kept refining the design, and by 4 ABY, shortly before the Battle of Endor, the TIE Defender project had reached its completion. The final production-ready Defender was ready to be rolled out, envisioned as a replacement for the aging TIE bombers and assault gunboats. But this moment would be marked by betrayal. Grand Admiral Zarin, the very man overseeing the Defender's development, turned traitor. Seeing an opportunity to use the powerful new starfighters for his own gain, Zarin launched a coup d'etat against Emperor Palpatine himself.
Report on our recent attacks.
Admiral Zarin, we have destroyed all the Sinar Fleet Systems factories located in the Omar system.
Excellent. The Empire has lost most of its capability to manufacture the TIE advanced starfighters. We will continue our destruction of the Emperor's military-industrial centers.
In the midst of this Zarin insurrection, the rogue Grand Admiral attempted to steal or destroy all TIE Defender prototypes and production facilities, hoping to deny Palpatine the use of this advanced weapon while empowering his own splinter fleet. And this also applied to other advanced TIE fighter versions like the TIE Avenger. The campaign that followed became the stuff of Imperial legend. Zarin's forces seized research platforms and factories, while loyalist Imperial forces scrambled to reclaim the Defender technology. Notably, Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was at this point one of the Empire's rising strategists, took command of the effort to stop Zarin. Thrawn, aided by elite Imperial pilots like Merrick Steele, managed to recapture the prototypes and secure the TIE Defender production lines. In one battle over the Parmel system, a trio of loyalist-flown TIE Defenders was pivotal in thwarting Zarin's attempt to escape with the prototype containers. Eventually, Zarin's coup failed, he was defeated, and the Empire's regime stood, though a bit shaken, and the Defenders, having nearly been stolen by an Imperial turncoat, ironically became instrumental in defeating that traitor. After Zarin's downfall, Palpatine had proof that the new fighter was both formidable, but also a threat to his power if it fell into the wrong hands. The Empire proceeded more cautiously with the TIE Defender, and production continued on a limited scale, with Defenders being assigned only to elite units and veteran pilots whom Imperial commanders felt they could trust. The starfighter's high cost and political baggage, as some in the Imperial court were still skeptical of it for being Zarin's baby, this all worked to ensure that it was never mass-produced across the entire Imperial Starfleet. But still, by the time of the Battle of Endor in late 4 ABY, a handful of TIE Defender squadrons were active. Sources conflict on whether any saw action at Endor itself. Even if they did, the Force was not on their side. But we do know that TIE Defenders were deployed in mop-up operations in battles against various rebel holdouts, like the elite Defender unit that fought at the Battle of Megiddo, where they cut down rebel fighters with ease. In each of these battles, the TIE Defender proved every bit as deadly as advertised, but there were never enough of them to turn the tide of war. But in the turbulent years after Endor, the Defender gained a second life in this fragmented galaxy. The collapse of Imperial central authority meant that various warlords, moffs, and Imperial remnant fractions held whatever assets they could. Some of the surviving TIE Defenders ended up under the control of these splinter groups, and even, in some cases, in New Republic hands. One notorious Imperial warlord, Lord Shadowspawn, or Chronal, employed a squadron of TIE Defenders during his campaign against the New Republic in 5 ABY, using their fearsome reputation to terrorize New Republic pilots. The NR learned to counter the Defender's strengths with superior tactics, and sometimes just sheer numbers, but every encounter was costly. Perhaps the most remarkable chapter of the Defender's post-war career came in 9 ABY, during the events of the novel Isard's Revenge. The recently formed New Republic found itself in a temporary alliance with Yazan Isard, the former Imperial Intelligence Director, and they're working against their shared enemy, the Warlord Prince Admiral Delek Krenel. Rogue Squadron, the New Republic's ace unit, and once Luke Skywalker's squadron, was equipped with TIE Defenders, which were provided by Isard for a covert op. Flying the Empire's deadliest fighters, Rogue Squadron infiltrated Krenel's forces and used the Defenders to devastating effect, even bringing down an enemy planetary shield during the Battle of Sirtrek IV. For those rebel pilots accustomed to X-Wings, they had to admit they were in love with this Defender, which had shielding as strong as their own but with speed and firepower that could outmatch nearly anything in the New Republic's arsenal. But following this mission, the New Republic did not keep the Defenders, mostly for political reasons. It's just a bad image to be the supposedly new government and the good guys, and you're riding around in the most terrifying TIE model ever made, but it cemented its legendary status in the minds of New Republic pilots. and some do stick around even as late as 25 to 30 ABY during the Yuzon-Fong War, where veteran pilots on both sides would speak of the TIE Defender with respect and fear, and were even able to use them against the invading extragalactic forces. The last documented use we have of them used by the Imperial Remnant goes as far as 44 ABY, 4 decades after Endor, but it was still one of the deadliest fighters in the galaxy, a testament to how ahead of its time the TIE Defender truly was. And so there is a common thread in both the original and new canon, that the TIE Defender was clearly the best option for the Empire, but the Emperor could not utilize this out of fear. Whether it was his want to impose fear with his super weapons, or his own fear of how powerful it would be in the hands of new Imperial traitors. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, it was created for the 1994 video game Star Wars TIE Fighter, and you were able to fly it. It was left out in the 1997 multiplayer game X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, stating that it would just be unbalanced. And the game data files have a hilarious entry, with the description field reading, quote, "Advanced Space Superiority Fighter, this craft is too powerful to be put in this simulation. Dream on, fanboy." Though it does return in the 1999 game Star Wars X-Wing Alliance. It would appear in countless comics and other video games, but a lot of the technical data is expanded in the Essential Guide to Warfare, and the new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. Please hit that like button, I really need your help. But most important of all, remember, there's always a better TIE. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the TIE Avenger will pull from every source available, so we can completely understand this cutting-edge Imperial space superiority fighter that represents a shift from the Empire's mass production philosophy toward a high-performance design. So let's jump right into its stats, and then we'll move into a comparison with other ships of its era, before finishing off with its history. It is larger than most TIEs, with a length of 13.41 meters, or about 44 feet, a width of 7.49 meters, or about 25 feet, and its height was 5.13 meters, or 17 feet. The Avenger's cockpit was the familiar ball-shaped pod of the TIE series, flanked by bent-wing solar arrays similar to those of the TIE Interceptor. This gave it a sleek profile while providing ample surface for solar energy collection. Though it should be stressed that that's an auxiliary source of power. Like most ships, it is still running off Tabana gas. The twin ion engines at the rear is what give the entire TIE series its name, and these are powered by advanced SFS IS-3A solar ionization reactors. These are high-output ion thrusters that propelled it faster than any previous TIE model, and its acceleration at space is rated at 133 megalight, meaning it could outrun standard TIE fighters and even keep pace with Rebel interceptors, but faster than most other ships of this era, including the X-Wing. And with this speed, it also has excellent maneuverability, with a 104 DPF rating, which even exceeds the agility of the TIE Interceptor and Rebel A-Wing. And as we'll see, this performance made it extremely nimble in dogfights. It was equipped with a Class 2 hyperdrive system, a major innovation for a TIE series craft, and this internal hyperdrive gave the Avenger independent deep space range, unlike the standard TIE, and it has a navigation computer with a limited jump memory installed to enable standalone hyperspace navigation, being able to plot routes with a maximum of 10 jumps. The incorporation of a hyperdrive into such a smaller fighter was made possible by miniaturized motivator technology, a breakthrough that is not seen in earlier TIE prototypes. It also comes with deflector shields, another feature absent on the mass-produced TIEs. The shield generator obviously gave the Avenger greatly improved survivability. At full power, its shields could absorb impacts that would destroy most ships, while its physical armor plating was only about as sturdy as the TIE Interceptors, so relatively light. The combination of shields and high speed made it exceptionally difficult to target and destroy in combat. Standard Imperial hull materials, like quadanium steel and titanium alloys, were used throughout the Avenger's frame, keeping it lightweight but inherently relying on shields for protection. And what might be the most interesting to you is that it's heavily armed for its size. The baseline Avenger carried 4 SFS LS 9.3 laser cannons mounted on the wingtips, and while the name is the same type as what we find on the TIE Interceptor, they have been tweaked to be more powerful, described specifically as being stronger and able to blast an asteroid apart in a single volley. These lasers could be fire-linked in various modes, firing each of those 4 lasers independently, or in dual fire or just quad mode where they all fire at once. This allowed it to adapt firepower as needed, and so the pilot wouldn't have to waste any energy. But it also featured a pair of MG2 general-purpose warhead launchers, which are built directly into the hull. Each launcher had a magazine for 4 concussion missiles, so 8 total, and it could be loaded with alternative ordnance. We've seen up to 3 proton torpedoes per launcher, or even heavier rockets and bombs in smaller numbers. This gave the Avenger a striking capability against larger targets, while still having most of its parts assembled in a standard TIE factory. And at least this prototype that we see in the new cannon has even more firepower, with additional laser batteries along the wing, for a total of 10 laser cannons, and a retractable heavy laser cannon under the cockpit.
Is the beam weapon completed?
Yes, Admiral Zarin. We are ready to deploy the weapon.
Excellent. Begin arming my fighter squadrons at once.
This heavy cannon required a charge up but could punch through blast doors in one shot, and the same prototype also mounted twin rotary blaster cannons for anti-personnel strafing fire, a capability Cassian Andor exploited against stormtroopers on the ground. These supplemental weapons may have been experimental additions and were not standard on the known production model Avengers that we'll see coming out in the later years, which primarily stuck to the 4 lasers and warhead launchers. As for avionics and sensors, it's outfitted with advanced targeting computers and a sensor suite, the Avenger's computer featuring a holographic or heads-up display in the cockpit, assisting the pilot by tracking enemy starships and even detecting life signs. This system could auto-calibrate missile targeting, allowing guided missiles to home in with minimal pilot input. Such sophisticated avionics made the Avenger deadly accurate, helping the pilot not be overwhelmed in complex engagements. Standard sensors were comparable to other TIEs, like long-range threat detection, Imperial IFF systems, but where it counts, it's enhanced by the new targeting algorithms. Its crew is just the one pilot, who's in a pressurized cockpit, and unlike the more Spartan TIE LN fighter, the Avenger included full life support systems, meaning the pilot did not require a fully sealed suit to survive in space combat. This both improved pilot comfort and was a nod to preserving elite pilots' lives. TIE pilots knew that their lives did not have any intrinsic value to the Empire, but if they worked their way up through the ranks, their superiors might bestow them with a ship that actually had life support. And so the TIE Avenger was a compact yet extremely advanced starfighter, integrating speed, agility, shields, heavy armament, and a hyperdrive all into one package, while still simplifying production by sharing a lot of the design features with the standard TIE. These features made it far more versatile and survivable than ordinary TIEs, essentially combining the best traits of Imperial and Rebel fighters into one platform. And I do think we should compare it to some of the other more specialized TIEs, starting with the TIE Interceptor. This was the Empire's next-generation superiority fighter introduced later in the Galactic Civil War, and it shares some lineage with the Avenger. In fact, both the Interceptor and Avenger drew wing design inspiration from the TIE Advanced X1, featuring the distinct bent wing solar panels. And the Interceptor is famed for its speed and firepower, having those 4 laser cannons, and its highest top speed of 1,250 km per hour, which beats almost everyone else. But to achieve this, it sacrifices shields and has no hyperdrive. All of its power is being channeled into the engines and its guns. And so the Avenger adds missiles, shields, and a hyperdrive. And thanks to its superior engines, the Avenger's acceleration and agility were reported to match or even outmatch the Interceptors on some occasions. This is likely due to being ace pilots though, as the official stats have it moving 50 km per hour slower, but in the insanely competitive atmosphere of TIE pilots who are always trying for personal fame and bragging rights, it's no surprise that some Avenger pilots were able to push it past the manufacturer's stats. But of course, the Avenger was never meant to be the mainline fighter. It wasn't supposed to replace the TIE LN. And notably, later in the Galactic Civil War, some elite Interceptor units did get upgrades like shields and better weaponry, which would narrow this gap. And so it really is just quantity versus quality, with the Interceptor meant to eventually replace the TIE LN. It's Darth Vader's TIE Advanced X1 seen during the Battle of Yavin that was the prototype that directly preceded the TIE Avenger. In many ways, the Avenger is the production model descendant of the X1, with the X1 introducing the concept of integrating a hyperdrive and shields into a TIE. A revolutionary idea at Sinar, but it did show that it was possible. Vader's craft only had a Class 4 hyperdrive, which is slower than most transports, but it did have heavier armor plating, along with improved cannons, and even carried cluster missile launchers. And that heavier armor is why he was able to take a hit at Yavin and spin off damaged but not destroyed. And this version was bulkier and less maneuverable than the TIE, while also being extremely expensive. These are some of the exact problems the TIE Avengers designers set out to solve. Engineers overcame the hyperdrive weight issue by acquiring a new miniaturized hyperdrive model, via the Habine, a rare and advanced species native to the Minox system, and this allows it to be a proper jump in technology. And the TIE Defender, which I'll be doing a breakdown on very soon, represents the pinnacle of Imperial starfighter design in the Galactic Civil War era. It was developed after the TIE Avenger as an even more advanced space superiority fighter. The Defender features a distinct triple wing, or trifoil configuration, and carries an astonishing arsenal and system suite. It has 6 lasers, 4 wingtip and 2 chin-mounted, 2 ion cannons and missile launchers, while still having deflector shields and a hyperdrive, effectively combining the roles of fighter, interceptor, and even light bomber. In performance, the TIE Defender outclassed the Avenger on most fronts. It can match or exceed the Avenger's speed and agility despite being larger. Its upgraded engines and triple wing design gave it superb power, reportedly about 40% faster in space than an X-Wing, making it one of the fastest ever built. Both craft have similar shields and hull protection, but the Defender's additional ion cannons make it more versatile. It can disable enemy ships as well as destroy them. And like I always say about the Imperial Star Destroyer, we see a greater shift to include more ion weaponry as the rebellion starts to grow and capturing people alive and torturing info out of them becomes more important. Gathering intel becomes the most important outcome of the battle. The Defender was envisioned as a multi-role supremacy fighter and could engage fighters, bombers, and even capital ships with equal effectiveness. So by comparison, the Avenger was smaller and a more specialized craft, focused mainly on starfighter combat, with only that secondary ability to attack larger targets due to a limited warhead capacity. In fact, one Imperial analysis notes that while no Rebel fighter could outrun or maneuver an Avenger, the Defender ultimately stole the crown for absolute performance, and its only disadvantage relative to the Avenger was its size and profile. The tri-wing arrangement made it a bigger target and introduced some pilot blind spots. Elite Avenger pilots mused that in the right hands, an Avenger could even outflight a Defender by exploiting its smaller size and better visibility. But of course they're gonna say that. Nevertheless, the Defender was undeniably more heavily armed and overall a more advanced design, but we can see a continuation from the X-1 to the Advanced and the TIE Defender, all proving that as technology advanced, you could pack even more into the general TIE fighter frame. The thing is, both the Avenger and Defender were extremely expensive projects, far beyond the cost of TIE fighters or interceptors.
Aside from the cost, which would be astronomical.
The Defender, in fact, was so pricey that in canon, Grand Admiral Thrawn's Defender program had to compete with the Death Star for funding, and ultimately the Empire chose the Death Star. In Legends, a few Defender squadrons were produced in the war's late stages, making them slightly more numerous than the Avenger by the time of Endor. It's telling that the Empire's top brass viewed the Avenger as, quote, in the mold of the TIE Fighter and Interceptor, whereas the Defender was seen as a far more flexible platform, closer to what the Rebellion was doing with their X, Y, and B-Wing fighters combined. In the end, the Defender symbolized the ultimate Imperial starfighter of the era, while the Avenger became a rare intermediate design. Now I want to take a closer look at how it was actually used. Its primary mission was to engage and destroy enemy starfighters, establishing Imperial control of the skies, or space, and in this role it was exceptionally successful on paper. As one Imperial officer would say, quote, during the Galactic Civil War, no Rebel Alliance fighter could outrun or outmaneuver the Avenger. This meant that in a dogfight, an Imperial pilot flying an Avenger had a performance edge against the X-Wings, Y-Wings, A-Wings, etc., and it could pick its fights or disengage at will thanks to its speed and hyperdrive, and its shield allowed it to survive hits that would vaporize lesser TIEs. This dramatically improved the longevity, which led to improved morale, meaning the Empire was getting the most out of their ace pilots. In practice, a lone Avenger was as effective as several TIE fighters, and this is specifically mentioned with the expert pilot Merrick Stilley. Imperial tacticians found the Avenger excelled as a hunter-killer. It could intercept fast Rebel craft, chase down fleeing ships, and perform hit-and-run strikes. Its warhead launchers gave it the ability to threaten larger prey as well, like when it uses concussion missiles to take out enemy corvettes or heavily damaged transports, something that could usually only be achieved with TIE bombers. There's even recorded use of heavy rockets successfully executing high-speed strike runs on enemy frigates, a tactic leveraging the fighter's speed to evade defensive fire while delivering ordnance. In squadron engagements, Avengers would engage enemy fighters head-on with lasers blazing, being able to absorb enormous amounts of damage and finish off crippled opponents with missiles before they could escape. There was even the option to equip a tractor beam projector, something unheard of in a starfighter, and this gave Imperial pilots a further edge. They could briefly snare a foe in close quarters to line up a perfect shot. This tractor beam tactic proved deadly. Even an A-Wing's vaunted agility meant nothing if the Avenger locked it in place at point-blank range, followed up by a quad-linked laser blast. Imagine how much just a simple tug from a tractor beam would throw off an ace pilot who knows every little aspect of their ship, who's anticipating the finest of movements. Even if the tractor beam didn't pin them in place completely, just tugging and pulling them slightly off balance would be deadly. And its hyperdrive also enabled surprise tactics. Small units of Avengers could operate independently, ambushing rebel squadrons or raiding bases without warning, then jumping back into the blue void. Which is a bit of poetic justice for the Rebellion, who perfected these hyperdrive-enabled hit-and-run tactics with the X-Wing. In defensive situations, an Avenger could rapidly redeploy across star systems, and in atmosphere, its speed and added weapons made it viable for ground attack runs. All these capabilities blur the line between pure space fighter and hybrid airspeeder/gunship. Though of course it was not perfect, and there were times where Imperial strategists felt that it should have included ion weaponry, and the payload was less than a TIE bomber. So there might be situations where you didn't have enough firepower anyways, and the Avenger played an awkward role where it was too specialized in some ways, and not really needed if you were going to send a swarm of TIE fighters, TIE interceptors, and bombers. That had been a tried and true strategy, and it was just cheaper. In the rare, full-on fleet battles, an Avenger squadron would still rely on bombers or capital ships to deal with enemy cruisers, as their missiles could soften a target but not obliterate something like the Mon Calamari ships. And the complexity and unique control systems they had also posed a challenge. It was specifically noted to be unconventional. Even veteran pilots needed training to handle it. We saw that when Andor stole one, and he struggled to fly it initially due to these unusual controls, nearly crashing as he took off. It was less forgiving to fly than simple TIEs. Only well-trained, high-skill pilots could exploit its full potential. Less experienced pilots might actually perform worse than they would in something like a TIE Interceptor. And of course, maintenance was another concern. Whenever you have more advanced systems, like a hyperdrive and shield generator, it all requires more upkeep and support. And so these were never seen in more resource-strapped Imperial garrisons. And this isn't really a critique, but the biggest thing that kept it from being more popular was just that it was so rare. It didn't have as many opportunities to shine. If a squadron of TIE Avengers found itself outnumbered by rebel fighters, which was more likely than not, overwhelming numbers of sustained fire from multiple attackers would wear down the Avenger's shield and bring it down. Rebel bases might be being ambushed by the Imperials, in which case they're more focused on just trying to escape. But even though the Avenger could take on any rebel ship one-on-one, maybe even two-on-one, 3 X-Wings, for example, should still be able to take it down. Wherever it was seen on the battlefield usually tilted the odds in the Empire's favor, but its rarity, high cost, and the Empire's shifting priorities meant it never got the chance to turn the tide of war in a large-scale conflict. In this way, it developed a sort of legend around itself. Most only encountered rumors of how good this thing was, and never actually saw it in person. And now turning to just finish off its history, it was born from the Empire's realization that rebel advancements in starfighter tech demanded a new approach. Early in the Galactic Civil War, high Imperial losses to rebel X-Wings and other advanced fighters made it clear that swarms of outdated TIE fighters was not enough. The Imperial Navy, under Admiral Demetrius Zarin, initiated the TIE Advance program to, quote, break away from the doctrine of quantity over quality. Signer Fleet Systems had already experimented with enhanced TIE prototypes, most famously the TIE Advance X1, which proved you could pack shields and a hyperdrive into a TIE, but as noted before, it never went into mass production due to costs and handling issues. After the Battle of Yavin, development continued in secret on improved models, and the project that would yield the TIE Avenger went through several prototype stages, often generically labeled TIE Advanced prototypes. One key breakthrough came when Zarin's team, in collaboration with the obscure Habine species, acquired a miniaturized hyperdrive motivator that was both small and reliable. Around 2-to-1 BBY, Signer had finally built a prototype that met all goals, with a hyperdrive, shields, warhead launchers, and still retaining the speed and agility of a frontline fighter. This craft was demonstrated in a test flight before Lord Vader and Admiral Zarin.
Let us show you the improvements we've made to the TIE Advanced.
The Emperor is very interested in your progress, Admiral Zarin. Hyperspace capability. Impressive.
The first TIE Advanced are now seeing combat. We also have prototypes of the next generation of TIE fighters.
Interesting. The Emperor will want a prototype immediately.
Vader was highly impressed and gave his approval to commence production. This new TIE Advanced was thereafter nicknamed the TIE Avenger, something pilots and officers came up with to distinguish it from Vader's TIE Advanced X1. It went into limited production shortly after its successful tests, and Sinar Fleet Systems began manufacturing the fighter, presumably at facilities in the core, as the exact factory locations are not all documented, but there are sources that imply there were dedicated production lines before they were sabotaged. But from the very start, the Avenger faced hurdles within the Imperial bureaucracy. Its cost was several times that of the TIE LN, or even a TIE Interceptor. That 400,000 credit price tag made many Imperial officers skeptical. Around the same time, Sinar had developed the TIE Interceptor and Bomber by borrowing aspects of the advanced program. But they omitted the most expensive components, the hyperdrives and shields. The Empire found those cheaper fighters more immediately practical, and so Interceptors and Bombers were ordered in large numbers, with plans to phase them in as replacements for older TIEs. And this all worked to reduce the urgency to produce Avengers. Still, a few squadrons were built and deployed, and one of the most notable times we see them is during the Seppan Civil War, a conflict between the Demoks and Republis around 1 ABY. Admiral Harkov, an Imperial officer in charge of pacifying that sector, had suffered heavy starfighter losses. He received several squadrons of TIE Avengers to reinforce his flagship, the Star Destroyer Protector. At that early stage, interestingly, the Avengers delivered to Harkov are lacking the hyperdrive modules, which might suggest that hyperdrive units were still in short supply or being finalized in this design. We know this because the Avengers had to be carried into the combat zone by transports. But these fighters immediately proved their worth in battle, outperforming the outdated enemy fighters. But the situation took a twist. Admiral Harkov was secretly plotting to defect to the Rebel Alliance. He intended to hand over his ships, which would include the new TIE Avengers. His plans were exposed in part by one of his own pilots, Merrick Stelly, and Harkov fled. The Avengers under his command were then reclaimed by Imperial forces during the fallout of that incident. And so it might have been their first mission of all time. They almost immediately fell into Rebel hands. Meanwhile, Admiral Zarin, the very man who oversaw the Avengers' development, also turned traitor. He even attempted a coup against Emperor Palpatine. He had access to advanced fighters, and he commanded his own forces equipped with TIE Avengers to attack prototype TIE Defenders. One of Zarin's first move in his rebellion was to attack the Empire's Avenger production facilities, making sure he would be the only one to have Avengers. Zarin knew how effective they were, and he didn't want loyalist Imperial forces to have any, and his strikes were largely successful. Multiple Avenger plants were destroyed or sabotaged, and this severely limited the Empire's ability to field any more of them. So Zarin is fielding them in his fleet, and so Imperial loyalists are fighting against this next-gen fighter, something they had never seen and maybe never even heard of. Ultimately, Zarin was killed and his coup failed, but by then the damage to the Avenger program had been done. In the aftermath, around the time of the Battle of Endor and 4 ABY, Imperial High Command decided to abandon large-scale Avenger production in favor of more cost-effective solutions. And of course, the hope of ramping up Avenger deployment died along with the Emperor during the Battle of Endor. The frantic Imperial remnant was just trying to hold on to whatever power they had, though there were some warlords that skipped straight to the TIE Defender when possible, realizing they could never have the sheer numbers of the full-strength Empire, and it would be better to just go all in on producing more TIE Defenders. So that's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, the production notes for this episode of Andor say that how the Avenger was depicted on screen was in part inspired by Kylo Ren's TIE Silencer, and that later era First Order model was incredibly fast and was shielded and with a hyperdrive. And so in the lore, you could see it as the First Order trying to make a new version of the Avenger.
The latest vessel from Lothal's Imperial shipyards, the Sinar Systems Advanced TIE Starfighter.
What's up, meta nerds? This video is going to be a complete breakdown of the Grand Inquisitor's TIE Advanced V1 prototype. All TIEs are built by Sinar Fleet Systems, and this version was directly based off the Scimitar, used most famously by Darth Maul. And similarly, this V1 was used by the third in line to the Sith Master, as Darth Plagueis was the one that recommended Palpatine give it to his assassin, Maul, like how the Grand Inquisitor was beneath Vader, with the latter using the TIE Advanced X1, also a prototype. The TIE Fighter would completely replace the ARC-170 and ETA II by around 5 years after the war, the year 14 BBY, and by 5 BBY, the V1 was officially introduced to the public during the Empire Day celebration on Lothal, celebrating the day that the Clone Wars ended and the Empire began.
pretty, isn't it?
Yeah, I almost feel bad about blowing it up.
While this particular one was destroyed by the rebel group, the Spectres, the Grand Inquisitor had been using one for some time by now. One of the most obvious differences is the wing shape and this folding feature. These solar energy collectors folding down serve the practical purpose of lowering the cockpit to allow the pilot to more comfortably enter, removing the need for the usual infrastructure you see with TIE hangars, which best case in capital ships took the form of catwalks from which the TIEs would hang, so the pilot could just drop in that top hatch. And they would build things like this in some bases on planets, or like we see with the First Order, they had these stackable racks and all of them were accessed by stairs on the side, while at the very most minimal you would have to have these movable stairs. So bringing that cockpit down is actually pretty practical for an Inquisitor, who's often going to a lot of remote areas on their own. And it made it only about 4 meters tall when folded, like the X1, which is less than half the size of a standard TIE. And even unfolded, it was 3 meters shorter, at 5.7 meters or 18 feet 8 inches. The cost was 150,000 credits, making it 2.5 times the cost of a standard TIE, and 10k less than the TIE Advanced X1, while being equal to an X-Wing. It's crazy to think of, but the Scimitar was 55 million credits. But that's really comparing Banthas and Ewoks. That cost is due to its acceleration, hyperdrive, weaponry, and of course the cloaking. But with a top-down view, you can see how this section on both the V1 and X1 took their inspiration from the Scimitar. And the reason why these two TIE Advanced versions are close to the X-Wing in cost is mainly because of the hyperdrive capability. While the X-Wing was much faster, with the Class 1 being the fastest class in the galaxy, these TIEs had a Class 4.5 and 4, making it equal to some large cargo haulers. This may seem insanely slow, but keep in mind they didn't have to do hit-and-run style attacks like the Rebels, and if they were scrambling to a time-sensitive target, they weren't doing it alone. The Empire would always throw a large force at any target, and even the Inquisitors are hardly ever fighting without backup. So these TIEs could be attached to anything from the Gazanti class to the decks of capital ships. And when it did arrive in atmosphere, the TIE Fighter was one of the fastest craft out there. While the X1 used by Vader was equal to a standard TIE, the Inquisitor's V1 maxed out at 1600 km per hour or 960 miles per hour, making it 52% faster than the X-Wing, and one of the only craft out there faster than an A-Wing, though not when it comes to real space distances. This stat is referred to as megalight per hour, and it is a bit silly if you look at it too long, putting ships at multiple times the speed of light, but ignoring that and using it simply as a scale to measure ships relative to each other, we see that the A-Wing and Eta II are the only ships out there faster than the experimental TIEs, with a big jump in speed seen by the First Order era, likely just due to being 30 years later. Now this is all powered by twin-ion engines, and would have likely looked a lot like your standard TIE underneath those Durasteel panels, with Tabana gas getting ionized for the engines, and these massive power generators energizing the two LS 9.1 laser cannons. But what is most impressive are the variable munition launchers, which was used by the Grand Inquisitor to track vessels by running with an XX-23S thread tracker, which was powerful enough to transmit out of hyperspace. And this is the same model that would be used to track the Millennium Falcon to Yavin 4.
You're sure the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship?
The V1 could be outfitted with missiles, which themselves could be a variety of missile types or mixed in with trackers for a total of 20 projectiles. The X1 also had a launcher, and this combo really helped close the gap between the greater power of the old ARC-170s and the now enemy X-Wings. And in the same vein was the inclusion of a shield generator. The standard TIE was known for being disposable, the military philosophy of putting citizens to good use as cannon fodder, having overwhelming forces, and tying the economy to military production. To the point that the pilots knew that even if they ejected and survived, it wouldn't be for long as they were left for dead out in space. This TIE also had an ejection seat, but it adds onboard life support systems, so the pilot wasn't required to wear this whole oxygen system. The Inquisitor does wear his helmet, but this appears to be for augmented reality displays, because he takes it off when the target escapes, and when this gets commandeered we see that it's not necessary. And in this same fight with the Ghost, as we saw with its great speed, it isn't that the TIEs couldn't overtake it, but that they only had forward-facing weapons, and hoped to overwhelm their shields.
Put fire! The shields will not hold indefinitely.
This problem was addressed by the First Order TIE, placing a rear gunner with these extra cannons, and this is why something like the Ghost was so hard to take down, with turrets and even the detachable Phantom, and was why the ARC-170 was necessary for the swarms of droid fighters. when they do get some hits in rapid succession. Not that this is unique to the TIE's weaponry, but we do get a good look at how droids connected to a ship for purposes like in this case manning the cannons. The jolt of electricity that is absorbed by the ship when incoming energy bolts start breaking through the shield and dispersing over the armor and then into the ship do a serious number on that connected droid. And moments later we see just how bad it was.
Chop us down!
This mission was to capture Imperial trader Sibo, who years earlier had volunteered to be augmented with the AJ-6 cyborg construct, and now could expose schematics for this new prototype starfighter, as well as the other variants being worked on, in addition to Walker schematics, Stormtrooper tactics, and the 5-year plan for Lothal. This intel was so important that the Grand Inquisitor led the operation to bring Sibo in, forcing the rebel group the Spectres to make some dramatic decisions. With the tracker connected and broadcasting their position, even through the blue void of hyperspace, Harrison Dula says that they can try and detach it, but interestingly, Kanan points out that because of their close call with this force-wielding pursuer, the Grand Inquisitor could now track them through the Force.
Why not just drop the Phantom into our trail and let the Imperials chase after their tracker?
The Inquisitor is on our trail, and as long as Ezra and I are on board the Ghost, we're jeopardizing Sibo's escape.
This is something we don't see depicted a lot, but it is one of the most dangerous aspects of being a Jedi survivor. And a dark, twisted part of Palpatine's plan is that even if they're not captured, merely knowing that they were hunted pushed so many survivors to choose to detach themselves from the Force. Combine this with knowing that heroics would attract attention, and you can see how the Inquisitorius removed the effect of the Jedi even if they hadn't killed them all. So to pull them off the trail, the Jedi hop in the detachable Phantom and perform a risky mid-hyper route ejection. As soon as it separates, it instantly starts to get pulled through the fabric of space-time and tumbles into real space. The abandoned old base is actually Fort Anaxis, the site of one of the largest final battles of the Clone Wars, and once inside of the hangar, we see just how hard it was to remove the tracker, eventually separating it and chucking it into the old LAAT gunship wreckage. The Empire always erred on the side of overkill, and the Grand Inquisitor arrived via Lambda transport with a squadron of troopers. The battle was intense, and the Jedi would have surely lost if it wasn't for Ezra's bond with the Furnox.
You're not going near it!
I believe I am.
This brought them the chance to flee, and later that year, after they defeated the Grand Inquisitor, the duo would steal the prototype.
The Inquisitor's TIE!
Well, we know he's not gonna use it.
You know what, kid? You worry me sometimes.
And they would use its superior speed to catch up to Hera in her stolen TIE, blasting away several Imperial fighters before docking with their Gazanti to make the jump to safety. The ship's ultimate fate was to be disassembled and analyzed by the Rebel Alliance, looking for weaknesses in this ship and TIEs in general, with General Antok Merrick stating that Captain Heranar and his crew had a, quote, merry time taking the ship apart. Despite this loss, Imperial Command was evidently impressed by the ship's performance, going from prototype to the official TIE of the Inquisitorius, used later by the 5th brother, 7th sister, and 8th brother, the latter having his hijacked by Chopper on Malachor, and then Maul would take it to leave Malachor. 3 years after this, in the same year as the Battle of Yavin, year 0, we get our last appearance of the V1 during the Battle of Fostar Haven. Lyndon Javes led Helix Squadron during an operation overseen by Ray Sloan, and under the orders of Wilf Tarkin, to hunt down the survivors of the destruction of Alderaan. A convoy of refugees was to be destroyed on sight, but this evil pushed Javes to defect, using the variable munitions launcher to hit his wingmates with ion torpedoes, allowing the convoy to escape, while he would join forces with Echo Squadron when they arrived to escort these Alderaanians. Of course, the sister ship, the TIE Advanced X-1, would continue to be used by Darth Vader during the Galactic Civil War. So that's it for the breakdown. And as for behind the scenes facts, this ship was brought into canon via Rebels, but was based on the TIE Advanced prototype of Legends, mentioned in the Imperial Handbook. There were no visual depictions, but it described the predecessor of the Advanced X-1 as being sleeker, a smaller silhouette, and having a compact wing panel configuration. It was also said to have been designed by Vader working along with Wraith Sinar, Sinar being the one who designed all the other TIEs and the Scimitar. And these were to be given out to the Inquisitors and Dark Side Adepts. Canon stats mentioned come from the TIE Fighter Owner's Workshop Manual, with additional info coming from Ultimate Star Wars, the Rebel Files, and Dawn of Rebellion, while that game shown is Star Wars Squadrons. But most important of all, remember, never hit that eject button, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is all about the Empire's cloaked TIE Fighter variant, the TIE Phantom. In a way, this is the TIE series coming back to its roots, as the entire line was inspired by the Scimitar. Sinar Design Systems produced the cloak ship used by Darth Maul, and CEO Wraith Sinar decided to try and make a mass-produced series of fighters with twin ion engines. These TIE fighters would be picked up by Palpatine and became the main fighter for the new Empire. Over the years, it would spawn a ton of variants, but it wasn't until after the Battle of Yavin that Imperial engineers decided to try and reintroduce stealth tech into a Sinar design. The body of this ship would be based on the V-38 assault fighter, which is why it doesn't have the eyeball cockpit that is found in nearly every other TIE variant. Grand Admiral Marty O'Batch was selected by Palpatine to lead this project due to the fact that Batch was an obscure military leader with no political connections, perfect for developing a secret fighter. The first candidate was Hybridium, a type of cloaking crystal that was much more abundant than the rare Stygium. On the Outer Rim moon Imdar Alpha, their research station was working endlessly to try and solve the problem of double blindness caused by the Hybridium version of cloaking. They could get the Phantom prototypes to cloak just fine, but then the pilots inside couldn't see out, or even detect anything outside of the cloak. 3 years of frustration led Batch to ask Palpatine for access to the Tarkin superweapon. This is essentially a bare-bones Death Star, with minimal structures built up around a planet-busting super laser. Aiden 2 was a known site of Stygium crystals, and though it would be very time-consuming to try and mine down to its crystal core, it would be incredibly easy to use droids to just scoop up Stygium crystals floating around in space. This problem was solved with a single shot from the Tarkin, turning this difficult-to-work world into a debris field of millions of crystals. Now there was plenty of Stygium to go around, and Palpatine saw the project was on the verge of being fully realized, so he allowed the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, the Terror, to protect the research station on Imdar Alpha. Both the TIE Phantom production facility and the Super Star Destroyer were provided with their own cloaking devices, making this entire operation completely undetectable. Final production cost of the TIE Phantom was 365,000 credits apiece, more than 6 times the cost of a standard TIE, and even more expensive than the TIE Defender. But for that price, you really do get it all. It had a Class 1 hyperdrive, tied with or beating most ships in the galaxy, and even a deflector shield. Its top atmospheric speed of 1,490 km per hour, or 926 miles per hour, is a bit slower than the TIE Defender, but beats out each of the Rebel starfighters, even the speedy little A-Wing. It also had more than twice the firepower of the TIE Fighter, with 5 laser cannons, 2 on the body, and 1 on each of its 3 wings. Having a cloaking device, hyperdrive, deflector shield, and 5 lasers requires a ridiculous amount of energy, which is why the whole body of this ship is just an enormous reactor, more than twice the size of the cockpit. This is also why there are so many large heat radiators and exhausts located on the front, sides, and rear. That being said, when it was cloaked, you couldn't use any of those other features, and it even reduced the speed. To help this a little, there were automatic systems that would disengage the cloaking when the pilot opened fire, and then pop back up as soon as they stopped. But perhaps most important for keeping this thing a secret was a self-destruct mechanism that would keep it from falling into the hands of rebels. And to run this thing, it required a 2-man crew, 1 pilot, and 1 gunner. Now when it came to debuting this ship, the Empire chose a pretty clever location. The Dryton Nebula was one of the spookiest places in the galaxy. In the 3rd year of the Clone Wars, Separatist and Republic forces fought a month-long battle over a Stygium mine. The Battle of Dryton was ended by a surprise attack from Hutt and Black Sun forces that mopped up all the survivors on the CIS and Republic sides. This was considered the only battle in the entire Clone Wars in which every Separatist and Republic combatant were killed. The criminals did a great job covering their tracks, and spreading rumors that that part of the galaxy had ghost ships. Supernatural lore gave rise to the name the Dryton Triangle, where these apparitions were said to appear. Many thought these were just silly stories, so the Empire conducted test flights in this area and attacked any rebels passing through. If any were to survive the attacks and tell their friends about a disappearing Imperial ship, they might just discount it as some crazy ghost story. Then trials were coordinated by an Imperial Nebulon B escort frigate, the Mephitis, which led an attack on a series of rebel patrols, but one of these runs was caught on a flight recorder. The rebellion now had proof that there were more to these stories, and then further information was gained on the location of this stealth ship's fuel source. Admiral Akbar thought they had to strike immediately, sending a squadron to destroy the fuel depot and tasking Rookie 1 to work with Rue Merlin and destroy the main facility. They were able to sneak on board the Super Star Destroyer the Terror, where they found hundreds of TIE Phantoms preparing for a finishing blow against the rebellion. The agents were able to steal one, operate it into the Terror's core, and set off a chain reaction that destroyed the SSD. But as it blew, it disrupted the main facility's cloak, revealing it to our pair of rebels. Realizing the fight was not over, they were able to use all the chaos to sneak into the factory and find its main core, destroying it along with thousands of TIE Phantoms. Even better, they were still in their TIE Phantom, so they brought it back to a rebel base so that they could figure out how it works. This way they could develop countermeasures, and would always have the option to use it against the Empire. That was a great plan, until its self-destruct device blew it to pieces. This program took an incredible amount of Imperial resources, and Marty O'Batch had a good idea about what happened to Imperial leadership when they failed the Emperor. He fled to the Outer Rim, but was later assassinated by his own crew. The few TIE Phantoms that were not destroyed ended up being formed into Shadow Squadron, though the ability to produce more of them was lost at this Imdar Alpha facility. So that's it for its history, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The TIE Phantom was created for the 1995 video game Rebel Assault 2, The Hidden Empire, and was based on an earlier design for the Lambda-class shuttle. Additional information was released in the sourcebook Stay on Target and Rebellion-era campaign guide, but it also got introduced into the X-Wings miniatures game. Remember, if you want to go AWOL, don't force your crew to go with you. And the Force will be with you. Always. TIE fighters are always changing to meet the needs of their time. What's up, Meta Nerds? This video will break down the new Outlander TIE Fighter. We'll see why this design makes sense for a fractured Imperial remnant, and even some cool behind-the-scenes facts on how this almost appeared in The Force Awakens. Of course, like all TIE variants, it retains a lot of the key looks and features of the TIE LN, but the most obvious changes are these S-foil folding wings. But why this change? Well, it's important to understand that the TIE Fighter was designed with an assumed infrastructure around them. It's cheaper to just build the hangar racks and specialized landing pad equipment once, and have all of that safely on a base or a carrier, instead of building landing gear into each of the countless TIEs pumped out over the decades. The sad truth was that TIE fighters were disposable. Those were the things getting blown up. It's much cheaper to build these permanent catwalk structures in Star Destroyers and Death Stars, or just have a simple set of stairs on wheels that you can roll into place. This low cost, just 3 times a Vulture droid, and less than half an X-Wing, allowed them to be pumped out at such a rate that any destroyed by rebels would be quickly and effortlessly replaced, which had a very demoralizing effect. They are famously weak, and there were even popular TIE fighter slogans like "No shields, all guts." But I think there's some strong evidence that the Outlander TIE was upgraded. When the Mando latches onto the TIE, it seems like he thought he could just fire through the glass. It would be odd if he didn't think that this was transparasteel. He must have some reason to think that this would work, so perhaps this TIE was reinforced. If not, I think that certainly the hull was reinforced. One is simply the fact that a Moff wouldn't be riding around in a flimsy TIE fighter of the line, it's just too risky. And proof of this is that these 2 explosives don't set the whole TIE fighter ablaze. It doesn't even sever the wing, it just blows apart some of the top half, as if it didn't penetrate the whole armor, but instead the blast was directed up and outward and tore up the more fragile solar collector array. We also get a glimpse at a really useful detection method new to this model, which shows you when something is placed on the hull, and most likely would have provided other damage reports and tactical information. As the TIE falls to the ground, we see that apparently the ejector seat mechanism was removed. Perhaps this was done to clear out some room for the landing gear. Interestingly, the 3 legs of this landing gear, 2 to the sides and 1 out the rear, are very similar to those of the X-Wing. Some speculate that this, combined with the S-foils, which bring its landed position into this X shape, may point to the Outland TIE being a retrofit that incorporated some X-Wing parts, perhaps captured by Imperial remnant forces. That or Incom Corporation had worked with Signar Fleet Systems to create this variant. Incom originally made the X-Wings for the Empire, so I could see this being the case. Shields and hyperdrives are often the most expensive parts of a ship, and so your standard TIE fighter has neither. And although those might be useful, I don't see any evidence to think that this variant has any either. We don't know for sure how large a force the Moff has, but he must at least have some large transports, if not a capital ship. There's various troops like regular stormtroopers, scout troopers, and death troopers, and even vehicles like speeder bikes and ITTs, all of which points to some sort of carrier. And so this Outlander TIE may still just be a short-range fighter. But remember, the TIE LN was never supposed to be setting down on strange terrain. They were most often in escort and patrol roles, with only occasionally ever engaging enemies. Once the Empire was killed and that well-oiled war machine started to fracture, things had to change. The TIE still had good firepower and excellent speed, so they were still really valuable. But now you would need TIEs that could land on worlds that you wanted to bring under your particular rule, as Imperial warlords took a more direct role in holding on to regional power. So hopefully you see how these small changes really do make a big difference in a time of a fractured empire. As for the behind-the-scenes facts, I just wanted to point out that there is some mechanism that lifts him out of the cockpit for dramatic flair, and conveniently we don't see him actually do the less graceful slide off onto the ground. Also, this design was first seen in concept art for The Force Awakens, created by the amazing Doug Chiang, who is responsible for a lot of the best stuff of the prequels, stuff like the Naboo Starfighter and pod racers. And in this episode, we saw that of course the Darksaber, a form of lightsaber, can cut through the hull, which would be true even if it has the thicker hull plating that I think it has. And this is connected to Gideon's past on Mandalore. He was in the Imperial Security Bureau and helped with the siege of Mandalore, and later would become the Marshal of Mandalorian space. But most important of all, remember, if this really is a combo of TIE Fighter and X-Wing, then it has brought balance to the Starfighters. And the Force will be with you, always. This ain't your grandpa's TIE Fighter. What's up, meta nerds? This video is all about the TIE DG Starfighter, aka the TIE Dagger. This is of course just one in a long line of TIE variants since the TIE LN was introduced over 53 years earlier in the final moments of the Republic. What was once a shieldless and medium-powered starfighter has received some massive upgrades. Let's start with those dagger-shaped wings. The reason for this shape in particular has to do with the deflector shield generator and the addition of heavy laser cannons. This second triangular wing acts as a deflector shield projector, one on each of the main wings of course, with the actual shield generator likely being housed in these extended wing strut areas. At least that's where it was in the TIE SF used by the First Order. This triangular shape may have helped with the directing of those deflector shield projectors, channeling it to be the strongest in front of the TIE Fighter, something that would match with Palpatine's apparent plan to just launch a full-out assault on all the worlds that opposed him. The space in between these wings was where they packed in the SJFS L7.0 heavy laser cannons. Interestingly, putting heavy laser cannons on a TIE was not a part of any Imperial variants, not even the TIE Brute. Its top speed is unknown, but it was likely at least that of the TIE SF, which was faster than most other TIE variants that came before it. But what we do know is that the handling was much better, making it much more agile. The flight controls have two independent control columns instead of a single two-handed yoke. It had an improved HUD and even a holographic display, which gave a much more detailed view of the surroundings, enemies, and the Dagger itself. It also changed the overall profile. Compared to the TIE LN, it was about a Jawa thinner, 2 Jawas longer, and about a newborn Jawa shorter. And of course these red accents give it the extra intimidation factor fitting for the Sith Eternal Fleet. As for who built it, that is claimed to be Sinar Jamis Fleet Systems, the merger that had to occur after the fall of the Empire. Some stuff seems to imply that this could have been built up on Exegol, but I think you could also read this as meaning that the fleet was being made by Sinar Jamis in Kuat and Trala, and then was secretly transported to Exegol for safe storage until the time was right. Because we do know that there was some coming and going from Exegol. As Sidious says, he made Snoke, and some of those shots made it seem like he meant this literally, that he may have created him in those cloning chambers and was perhaps puppeteering the Supreme Leader all along. Or the answer is a bit of both, that in order to really keep the Sith Eternal Fleet a secret, materials were provided by those companies and shipped in separately. Then the Sith Eternal engineers and shipwrights built the fleet on Exegol. This would help explain why we never see this TIE variant with the First Order, and definitely not the axial super laser that's found on the Zistan class. But let me know what you think makes the most sense. That's all the information for the TIE Dagger so far, and the only cool behind the scenes fact is that all of this info comes from the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary. And I don't know about you guys, but I was really hoping for a lot more in the final battle of this saga. But at least some of the designs are cool, and I think for all of the technological advancements that we've seen in this era, the TIE Dagger specs do make a lot of sense. Also, this design may have been inspired by concept art from The Force Awakens, while others note that it's very similar to E.C. Henry's TIE Vector design. Remember, the New Republic seems to literally have no intelligence, at least definitely no spies, and the Force will be with you, always. All I'm saying is there must be a lot of red paint in the unknown regions. What's up, meta nerds? This video is about the new TIE Baron Space Superiority Interceptor, an official interceptor for the First Order that was of course inspired by the TIE Interceptor. Its red paint job and the reason why it's called Baron is actually a reference to an elite class of pilots under the Empire. By the year 5 BBY, there was a class of TIE pilots that were called Flight Barons. One of the most famous would be Valen Rudor, operating number LS-607. He had already proven himself to be one of the galaxy's best pilots, and so was convinced by his superiors to transfer to Lothal and fly prototypes at a Sinar Fleet Systems production facility. On Empire Day in 4 BBY, the Flight Baron would set off festivities with a gallant flight over Capital City in the heavily improved TIE Fighter variant called the TIE Advanced B-1. This would be stopped short by the Spectres, but the legacy of these ace pilots would be remembered throughout the galaxy. All Barons had these distinctive red stripes on their black flight suits, something that the FO copied for their First Order Special Forces. They also kept the title of Baron for their ace pilots, but made them even more distinct by just making their entire suits red. Their helmet and life support gear also differs from other First Order pilots. The most notable in the FO was Major Baron Elric von Rig. From here on out, there will be spoilers from Star Wars Resistance. I haven't watched a lot of it, but just by grabbing these clips, I saw a lot of very interesting and truly exciting ship and starfighter battles, so this might be a series to check out. But back to the Baron. He led a squadron of other TIE fighters and was entrusted with the Order's most sensitive missions. This had Von Rig often working with Captain Phasma, and the first time we meet him, he is trying to shoot down a couple of New Republic pilots. Two are chased away, but Kazuda remains until Poe Dameron and his reinforcements arrive. This actually gets into a really cool point in the new canon lore, something that I want to explore more in a separate video, where essentially the military branch of the New Republic gets fed up with the Senator's inaction towards the growing First Order and is using its pilots to transmit information to the Resistance. Remember that at this time, the Resistance really is a kind of illegal paramilitary force. The Baron's TIE Interceptor was driven off, but would continue to haunt Kazuda. These assaults showed some of the ship's amazing capabilities. First off is just the raw speed. There are no official stats, but I would imagine that it is faster than its predecessor, which topped out at an atmospheric speed of 1,250 km per hour and at a speed in empty space of 110 megalights. Other TIE variants from the FO range from 130 megalights to 150, so I would imagine this Interceptor to be the fastest of all of them. By the way, that makes it more than twice the speed of the Slave 1. The 4 wingtip laser cannons are pretty standard, and like more advanced TIEs, it was equipped with a hyperdrive, and I would assume some shielding. But what's really interesting is the variable munitions weapons. Some shots look like a charged energy bolt, but it can also fire proton missiles and mag pulse warheads. These warheads work a lot like ion shots, but with the quicker acceleration and lock-on abilities you get when firing it in a rocket, instead of just as an ionized ball of plasma. Now I should point out that when this thing is destroyed, it doesn't appear like it has any shields, but if we're honest, almost all Star Wars starfighters are just taken out in a couple shots, even if they are listed as having shields, so we can't really deduce much from this. Now from the time that we first see it to when the TIE Baron is eventually killed, it is 6 months before the destruction of Hosnian Prime, up to a couple months past this event. Whether or not the TIE Baron will play an important role under Kylo Ren's rule is as of yet still unknown. But you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. This ship, and almost all First Order ships, are made by Sinar Jamis Fleet Systems, a merger that happened after the fall of the Empire, and the last that remains of Sinar Fleet Systems, who made all of the Emperor's TIEs. The TIE Baron was first introduced in October of 2018 in the show Resistance, and Season 2 of Resistance is set for this October. Some of the additional information comes from an expansion of X-Wing that just released this month. And in Legends, there was the 181st Imperial Fighter Wing, also known as Saber Squadron. Ships inspired by them also appear in the X-Wing's miniature game. And the real-world inspiration for the rank of Baron and the TIE Baron's red paint job is the famous World War I pilot described as the Aces of Aces, nicknamed the Red Baron. I couldn't find the exact reason why he painted it red, and I assume that a lot of people will think it is silly to have a red starfighter in space, especially when you can so easily blend into the black background. But for one, it's easy to lose track of something no matter what color it is in the vastness of space, but also it helps your squad follow your maneuvers. Remember, Baron Von Rig was the leader of a fighter squadron, and so was the real-world Red Baron. The real Red Baron saw his hero die in a mid-air collision with a friendly aircraft. Not sure if this is the reason for the color, but I'm thinking that the bright red ensures that your squad doesn't lose you in the chaos. Given that the TIE Baron is one of the fastest ships we've ever seen, and its maneuverability is also insane, I think the pilot was more concerned with his allies losing him than his enemies zeroing in on him because of his bright red paint job. But what do you think? Is the red ship dumb, or actually really smart? Do you hope to see it in future Star Wars material, or are you hoping for a different Interceptor on the big screen? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. But most important of all, remember, Snoke really likes the color red. And the Force will be with you, always.